Chapter 539. Yang Qindong seemed to have suddenly thought of something and seemed to have been enlightened. He looked at Kai Gu and said, "That's right. Just now, Emissary Kai's words did indeed remind me of something. The southern Ming Empire is vast and has a large population. Perhaps we can think of something from there." "Oh, is there any solution?" Seeing that the situation seemed to have taken a turn for the better, Kai Gu asked with glowing eyes. Yang Qindong did not immediately say the answer. Instead, he went silent for a while before muttering to himself, "The so-called vast land and abundant resources are true. However, it is a pity that those things cannot be moved or moved. The southern Ming Empire also does not want the mercenaries to interfere with the matters there. Thus, this problem can be eliminated. As for the large population, this duke recalled what the mercenary leader said a while ago. He said that if we want to build a base for the mercenaries in Jiaoji, we will need a large number of people. It is clear that after the war, too many people died in Jiaoji. The population is already showing signs of negative growth. If the southern Ming Empire can provide some people, perhaps we can borrow some money." "Provide people?" Kai Gu was confused by Yang Qindong's words. His face was filled with confusion. "Yes, provide people." Yang Qindong seemed to have made up his mind as he said, "Nowadays, the southern Ming Empire needs money to train the new army. However, money doesn't just fall from the sky. It's impossible for us to not have to pay anything and just talk about money without paying anything. On the surface, it seems that this duke is in charge of the Yang family bank. However, you should be able to guess that the mastermind behind all of this is the mercenary leader. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the goods that are selling everywhere are all produced by the mercenaries. I am just putting on an act and helping out a little." Yes. Kai Gu nodded his head continuously. Regarding the Yang family bank, the immortal abode in Baiming's capital, and the sky beyond heaven, the outside world had already come to a conclusion. They also believed that these achievements had nothing to do with Yang Qindong. After all, he was so young and the Yang family's background was so clean. How could so many good things suddenly appear in the world? There was only one explanation. There was someone else behind this, and this person was most likely the mysterious mercenary. Now that Yang Qindong had explained himself, the result was the same as everyone else's guess. It was no wonder that Kai Gu kept nodding at this time to express his agreement. Seeing that Kai Gu agreed with him, Yang Qindong knew that the matter was almost done. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, "Most of the money in the Yang family's bank is from mercenaries. If you want to borrow money from them, you will have to get their permission. In other words, you need to give them something that will satisfy them. If that's the case, the only thing you can offer is your large population. How about this? There's no need for any collateral. The southern Ming Empire will provide the manpower, and will provide the money. Let's just do the transaction. Trading people? But I don't know what the rules are." Kai Gu was a little confused by Yang Qindong's words, and his face was in a state of confusion. It must be said that there were indeed cases of human trafficking among the people. However, it was mostly due to the lack of servants in large families. Only then would they occasionally buy some. It was normal to say a dozen more, or a few less. The amount of money traded was also very limited. It could be as small as a few silver taels, or as large as a few hundred silver taels. But this time, the southern Ming Empire needed tens of millions of silver taels. How many people would they need to buy? Seeing Kai Ji's doubts, Yang Qindong explained, "Human trafficking has been going on since ancient times. I don't think there's a need for me to say anything about it. The only problem with this transaction is that the southern Ming Empire needs too much money. Naturally, the amount of people needed to be traded must be large. How about this? I will make the decision for the leader of the mercenaries, my brother. We will use 20 silver taels to buy a woman from our great Ming Empire. Children under 10 years old will be 15 silver taels. Elders over 50 years old will be 5 silver taels. Males between 14 to 40 years old will be 50 silver taels per person. As for how many people the Southern Ming Empire can provide, the mercenaries will pay the same amount of money. How about it? After beating around the bush for a long time, Yang Qindong finally brought up the matter of him needing a large number of people in a very shady manner. The reason why he didn't bring up this matter at the start was because he was afraid that Kai Gu would have other ideas. Like now, when the other party was at his wit's end, bringing up this kind of exchange condition would be more acceptable. As expected, Kai Gu didn't think too much about it. On the contrary, he began to calculate the cost of this human trafficking transaction in his mind. Using 20 silver taels for a woman as an example, this kind of price wasn't considered very generous. After all, when some large families wanted to buy maidservants, they would often offer a higher price than this. However, the mercenaries wanted a large number of people. They weren't picky, especially in terms of appearance. This wasn't something that those large families could compare to. Since a woman was 20 silver taels, 10 of them would be 200 silver taels, 100 would be 2,000 silver taels, then what about 10,000? What about 100,000? Wouldn't that be 2 million taels? In addition to the elderly and children, 100,000 would be another 2 million taels. The existence of these people wouldn't be of much use to the great Ming Empire. On the contrary, their existence was mostly a waste of food. If these people could be thrown out, then wouldn't the Southern Ming Empire be able to save a lot of resources? Not to mention, a young man would be worth 50 silver taels. 100,000 people would be a total of 5 million taels. Speaking of which, what the Southern Ming Empire had the most right now was naturally the population. Especially with the Min King's rebellion, many refugees from Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were heading towards Nanjing. On the way here, Kai Gu saw countless refugees. With a rough estimate, the population was at least 1 to 2 million. If all these people were traded to the mercenaries, how much would it be worth? Wouldn't the money for the training of the new army be easily gathered? Not to mention that the mission would be completed, it would also reduce the pressure on the Southern Ming Empire. Wasn't this killing two birds with one stone? Presumably, after the mission was completed, the emperor would definitely look at him in a new light. The more he thought about it, the more excited Kai Ji's heart became. When he looked at Yang Qindong, there was a burning feeling in his eyes. Duke Zhongdan, I wonder if there is a limit to this transaction. There is no limit. It depends on how much money you need and how many people you can provide. Of course, there's one thing that needs to be said, and that is that we won't force you to buy them. You shouldn't force us to sell them to you either. If you force them and they try to escape or commit suicide on the way here, then we won't take the blame. Those people's bodies still have to be sent back, and the money has to be returned. Otherwise, if we anger the mercenaries, it won't be good for anyone. Yang Qindong had to make things clear. He understood the way the Southern Ming Empire did things. In order to achieve their goal, they would do anything. If they really sent some weak and sick people to his side and kept all the good seedlings, then who knew how many families would be broken up? Under such circumstances, would the Han people who were traded be able to stay and work at his side with peace of mind? If that was the case, it would take a lot of energy to do the ideological work of these people every day. In order to prevent such a thing from happening, some ugly things must be said first. Of course, our Southern Ming Empire won't do such a despicable thing. Kai Gu quickly waved his hand, although he did have such an idea. In fact, similar things would happen in the process of trading people, but it really couldn't be done too much. Otherwise, angering the mercenaries really wouldn't be beneficial. That's good. Since Envoy Kai knows how to handle this matter, then I won't say anything more. This is the matter. You can go back and reply to the emperor. If you agree, the Yang family bank will first enter Nanjing City, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jianing Prefecture, then the trade will be carried out there. In the end, all the people will be transported to the Songjiang Prefecture's dock. There will be mercenaries there to accept the people. You can take the silver from the Yang family bank in the 3 places through the bills issued by them. After Yang Qindong gave the method and process of the trade, he made a request. These 3 newly opened Yang family bank, I need my 4th brother to manage. I know that he should be in Nanjing's capital now. It should be easy to find him. His 4th brother was Yang Qindong. Previously, Zhu Qizhen wanted to use this person to threaten Yang Qindong. But now that everyone was cooperating, the so-called threat no longer existed. With Kai Ji's identity, he naturally knew about Yang Yang. Before he came, the emperor had ordered that if the Duke of Loyal Courage asked about this matter, he had to explain it well. He had to say that he liked Yang Yang's ability and wanted him to go to the capital to be an official. In short, this matter could not cause displeasure between both sides. Now that Yang Qindong did not delve into what was going on, he naturally would not deliberately mention this matter. He immediately nodded, indicating that there was no problem. Yang Qindong only mentioned the matter of his 4th brother. He believed that with Kai Ji's intelligence, he would know how to reply to Zhu Qizhen. As for the matter of him wanting to be conferred the title of king, he did not mention it again. Now was not the time to force him. It was better to get a large number of people first. As for the other matters, he believed that when the conditions were right, success would follow naturally. The meeting between the 2 sides went smoothly. Kai Gu was also very satisfied. After he said what he needed to say, he stood up and bid farewell. Now that the war in Jiaozhi was over, but it seemed that the mercenaries did not have any intention of letting go. They still wanted to use the Lansang kingdom to attack. He needed to report this matter to Yingzong and make a decision as soon as possible. There was also the matter of the population trade. After all, if he got the silver first, he could train the new army first. The South Ming kingdom would be able to reach the moment of strength earlier. Chapter 540. Kai Gu, who knew that there was no time to lose, packed up his luggage after leaving Yang Qindong's residence. In less than half an hour, he left Shiyu City and went straight back to Nanjing. Tiger's man reported the news of Kai Ji's departure to Yang Qindong, and then said with some worry, "Young master, do you think the Southern Ming Empire will agree to the human trade?" "They will, they have no choice now. Besides, there are wars everywhere, and now there are many refugees. They are still worried about how to solve this matter. We have given them such a gap, they will definitely take advantage of it," Yang Qindong said confidently. It was no wonder that he would be so confident. At that time, the idea of people-oriented did not penetrate deep into people's hearts, and no emperor would really pay much attention to it. It was nothing more than when there was no conscription, there would be a shortage of people. As for normal times, there wouldn't be so many people thinking about it. Moreover, the Great Ming Empire had just experienced its heyday, and the population was more than 60 million. This time, it was just a transaction of 100,000 people, it was really not a big deal. Inform everyone that the Yang family bank is ready to enter Nanjing, Songjiang, and Jianing. In addition, inform Qiqian City to prepare enough silver. If there is not enough silver when the transaction is done, it will be a joke. Yang Qindong gave an order to Tiger's man. The bank was newly established, and the silver reserves were naturally needed. However, relying on the Baiming Yang family bank was obviously not enough to support the overall situation. Fortunately, Qiqian City had already accumulated a lot of gold and silver. Not to mention how much profit the Navy could make from controlling this sea area, the advanced products produced by the factories were in short supply once they were shipped out, and they could all be sold at a high price. How could there be a shortage of silver? Tiger's man left, leaving Yang Qindong standing in the yard with an indifferent expression. This human trade was originally part of his plan, but he hadn't figured out how to do it. Kai Ji's appearance gave him a chance to do it openly. It could be imagined that once there were enough Han people, the road of expansion could continue. Otherwise, they could only fight for the country and not defend it. This kind of expansion would lose its meaning. Of course, it would take some time for the human trafficking to be completed. What he needed to do now was to settle the matter in Jiaozhi. How to stabilize the hearts of the people and how to make this place a bridgehead for the mercenaries to attack and retreat was the focus of the recent work. Call Kong Jia and Song Jia here. Yang Qindong thought about the importance of talents, so he thought of the two political commissars. Yes. Beta Persei responded and turned to leave. Only Yang Qindong's figure was left in the courtyard, standing between heaven and earth. With the arrival of the mercenaries and 45,000 educated youths, the situation in Shiyu City had undergone earth-shattering changes. The streets were much cleaner than usual. There were more shops in the city that could be freely traded. The granaries in the city were also completely opened, allowing the people to trade freely. There were many more patrolling soldiers on the streets to ensure the stability of law and order. At the same time, there were also some criminals who wanted to fish in troubled waters, so that the safety of the people could be better maintained. To be able to restore the city that was originally damaged by the war, especially the destruction caused by the mortar shells, in such a short period of time, it was naturally beneficial to the joint efforts of everyone. Among them, the two political commissars who were in charge of political work were especially important. Under Yang Qindong's request, the political workers not only needed to be able to stabilize the morale of the army during wartime, but also needed to display their unique abilities in the city's construction. In this regard, Kong Jia and Song Jia did very well. Under their command and leadership, the political workers at all levels in the army displayed their abilities. Shiyu City could be said to be changing every day. Just when the two were busy, a member of the second guard squad found the two political commissars and said that the sixth young master wanted to see them. The members of the guard squad had long been in the eyes of the officers at all levels, so they naturally recognized them. Seeing the person coming, the two political commissars did not say anything. After handing over the matters at hand, they followed the person to the temporary palace in the city. In the same courtyard, Yang Qindong had some fruits and tea on the table in front of him. Seeing the two political commissars coming over under the lead of Beta Persei, Yang Qindong smiled and waved at them. Come, sit here. Kong Jia and Song Jia were somewhat flattered and hurriedly stepped forward, then each found a seat and sat down. The Jiaoji kingdom was destroyed so quickly. Not to mention others, even the mercenary officers did not expect it. Because of this, Yang Qindong was once again a legend. While his glorious image was deeply rooted in people's hearts, it also made people look up to him even more. Sensing the nervousness of the two political commissars, Yang Qindong laughed and said, Relax, you don't have to be so nervous here. This time, I called you over because I know you've worked hard. Let's relax and have a casual chat. Kong Jia and Song Jia did not really think that the sixth young master called them over for a chat. The two of them sat there and looked at each other, then said in unison. Sixth young master, if you have anything to say, just say the word. Okay. Seeing that the two political commissars knew that he had something to say to them, Yang Qindong smiled, then got up and poured a cup of tea for each of them. His attitude made the two of them stand up immediately. To be able to have the sixth young master pour tea for them, this treatment was too good. The two of them felt uneasy. Fortunately, Yang Qindong quickly explained the reason for calling them over. The two of you have worked hard during this period of time, and your work has been very effective. However, even though we have conquered Jiaoji, this is only the first step. How to govern this place and let the people here get used to our governance is the most important thing. How about it? Have the two of you ever thought of quitting the military and staying here to govern? Yang Qindong chuckled. He was ready to appoint generals. People say that it is easier to conquer a country than to defend it. The current Jiaoji was facing such a problem. It was impossible for the mercenaries to stay here for too long. They had too many things to do. Therefore, in the future, this place would have to be independent. Even though the Jiaoji mercenaries and the natives of Jiaoji like Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Ruan Chunqing were in charge, Yang Qindong wouldn't be at ease if he didn't leave his own people behind. The reason he called the two of them over was obviously to choose one of them and leave one of them behind to govern Jiaoji. Yang Qindong had quite a number of generals under his command. After training and systematic learning, many of them had the ability to lead an army and fight on their own. However, in comparison, he had enough generals, but not enough civil officials. There were even fewer civil officials who could govern a place. After much consideration, Yang Qindong set his sights on the two political commissars, Kang Jia and Song Zhe. After a period of observation, the performance of these two people was very good, so Yang Qindong could rest assured and entrust them with heavy responsibilities. In fact, he could have ordered one of them to stay behind, but he didn't do so. He wanted to see what they wanted to do. After all, nothing forcibly done was worth it. The two of them didn't expect the sixth young master to call them over for this. Caught off guard, the two of them hesitated. As the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, it was rare for him to lead an army alone. However, he was still one of the commanding officers of the 1st Regiment. Furthermore, he had such a powerful mercenary army. When he fought a battle, it was truly a pleasure to him. Moreover, with such a modern army under his command, he would be able to contribute a lot to the war. If they were to withdraw from the army now, it would be equivalent to giving away a lot of their contributions. This made them somewhat reluctant. Besides, they could tell that the destruction of Jiaoji was only the result of the mercenary army's initial efforts. There would be many more such incidents in the future. If they stayed behind in Jiaoji now, would they still be able to climb to a higher position in the future? Everyone has their own selfish motives, but they are also ambitious. If they stayed in Jiaoji, it would be equivalent to stopping their progress. It was no wonder they were in such a difficult position. Their expressions kept changing. Yang Qindong saw everything, but he didn't say anything. He was waiting for the two of them to make their own decisions. If they didn't want to withdraw from the army, he wouldn't force them to do anything. He would continue to look for suitable candidates. However, the two of them had a lower status in his heart. After all, they didn't see the big picture and couldn't see the big picture. Such an officer's future was limited. Time passed by slowly. After Yang Qindong drank 2 cups of tea, Kang Jia and Song Zhe finally came to a decision. After looking at each other, they spoke at the same time. "Sixth young master, I am willing to stay." Yang Qindong didn't expect the two of them to speak at the same time. Of course, he was very satisfied. Good, good. It's rare for you to see the big picture. Since that's the case. Yang Qindong's gaze lingered between Kang Jia and Song Zhe. He looked at Kang Jia and Song Zhe and said, "Song Zhe will stay. Other than the 30,000 Jiaoji mercenaries, I will leave you with a platoon of Ling Feng and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers. Also, if you have any other requests, feel free to state them." Choosing Song Zhe over Kang Jia was naturally because the former was only a political commissar of the auxiliary army. Compared to political work, Kang Jia was obviously better. Therefore, Yang Qindong had long wanted Song Zhe to stay in the company. Since Kang Jia had taken the initiative to ask for it, he decided to make the decision. Chapter 541. It was reasonable that Song Zhe was willing to stay. He was only the political commissar of the auxiliary division. Even though he was doing a good job, he still needed some free time to be promoted to political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment. Since there was no room for him to rise in the military, he might as well take up a position in the local government first. The 6th young master was the one who suggested this. Song Zhe was sure that the other party would take note of his tactfulness. If there were any good opportunities in the future, the other party would surely remember him. As for the other requests, Song Zhe thought about it carefully and made a suggestion. "Sixth young master, if it's possible, I hope to open a young family bank in Jiaoji. Although I haven't done any management work, I think Jiaoji should be built into a commercial center that radiates to the surrounding areas. If that's the case, it's necessary to have a young family bank to manage the finances." Over the past few days, a lot of resources had been shipped to Shiyu City from the sea. Most of them were clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. The clothing was mainly of various styles. Since this place was going to be managed by the mercenaries in the future, the clothes worn by the people would have to be changed to be more Chinese. They would have to change into traditional Chinese clothing. At the very least, they would have to change from a visual perspective. Fortunately, the garment factory in Qiqian City had expanded in scale. It wasn't too difficult to satisfy the needs of Jiaoji. As for the food, it was naturally a large amount of potatoes. Even though it was a little boring to eat them all the time, it was enough to satisfy one's hunger. A person would only have the energy to do more things after eating a full meal. As long as they could endure this period of time, more land in Jiaoji would be developed. With more land, not only would they be able to be self-sufficient in terms of food, they might even be able to supply other places. As for the living, it was even simpler. They would have to build more houses. Qiqian City would provide some cement. In addition, there were many mountains, forests, and trees in the vicinity of Jiaoji. Building more houses wouldn't be a problem. The last line was related to the problem of road construction. After all, there was a limit to the production of cement. Therefore, they would first have to level the roads between the cities. Then, a cement factory would be built in Jiaoji. Slowly, the main road here would be paved with cement. With the development of transportation, there was naturally no problem for commerce to flourish. Yang Qindong had already made certain arrangements before entering Jiaoji. Now, he just had to do things step by step. Song Zhe, who knew a little about these things, only needed to follow the plan. However, before the troops and horses were mobilized, the provisions had to be mobilized first. In order to build a place, the most important thing was money. That was why he proposed to set up a young family bank here. As long as there was a bank, the initial funds could be operated in the form of loans. When there was money in the future, it could be slowly repaid. Sure. Yang Qindong nodded and agreed after Song Zhe finished speaking. Setting up a young family bank in Jiaoji was part of his plan. Even if Song Zhe didn't mention it, he would have arranged for someone to do it. Then I have no further questions. Song Zhe quickly nodded. Since the sixth young master had already arranged everything, there wasn't much for him to consider. As for whether he would encounter problems in his work in the future, he would just have to deal with them when he encountered them. Good. If there's anything else, you can send someone to contact me. I will settle it for you. Yang Qindong didn't have the experience of building a small country. Therefore, he couldn't overthink everything. Therefore, he gave Song Zhe the privilege of being able to contact him at any time. The matter was finally settled. Song Zhe became the temporary person in charge of Jiaoji and Chang Qianhao became the first chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. Yang Qindong hoped that the two of them could work together to transform Jiaoji into a truly prosperous place. The matter of Jiaoji could be put aside for now. Yang Qindong set his sights on the neighboring Lansang kingdom. Fan Yuhai brought 20,000 Jiaoji elites and fled to this kingdom. Logically speaking, this was a good excuse to launch a military attack on the Lansang kingdom. Just like when he dealt with Jiaoji previously, he was here under the banner of the Southern Ming Emperor, and also to avenge the assassination attempt on his life. With enough justification, he had a good reason to attack. Now that he had an excuse to deal with the Lansang kingdom, Yang Qindong really wanted to lead the mercenaries to annihilate the kingdom. Unfortunately, before Yang Qindong could decide what to do, the Lansang kingdom had already sent someone to inform him that they were encircling Fan Yuhai's troops. They would definitely give the mercenaries and the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty an explanation. Initially, he thought that it would be too big of a step to make a move on the Lansang kingdom before Jiaoji was stabilized. Since there was no excuse to attack, Yang Qindong could only wait and observe. At the same time, he used this opportunity to train his troops. Speaking of which, in the Battle of Jiaoji, there were too many auxiliary soldiers who contributed greatly and earned the right to be promoted to the Cold Vanguard. At the same time, there were also many temporary auxiliary soldiers who performed well and earned the right to be promoted to auxiliary soldiers. Now, the military was focused on this matter. Even the political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment, Kong Jia, was no longer busy with the construction of Jiaoji. Instead, he started to organize the promotion assessment. Everyone was busy. Yang Qindong brought the first and second guards to join the assessment team. He acted as an invigilator to assess the outstanding soldiers who were promoted from auxiliary soldiers to Cold Vanguard. Southern Ming capital, Nanjing City. Kai Gu, who was covered in dust, rushed back. As soon as he entered the city, before he could even take a sip of water, an embroidered uniformed guard appeared in front of him and brought him to Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect. "Beloved Minister Kai, how did it go?" Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously when he saw Kai Gu in the side hall of the palace. In the side hall, Chao Jixiang, Qian Sengliang, Kai Zhong, and a few other eunuch leaders were also present. Kai Gu knelt on the ground and recounted everything he had seen and heard along the way, including the current situation of Jiaoji. Listening to Kai Gu kneeling on the ground and saying something, Zhu Qizhen's face was sometimes gloomy and sometimes relaxed. His expression was constantly changing. Not only him, but the eunuchs standing below were also shocked. They didn't expect Jiaoji to be wiped out in such a short period of time. This gave them a new understanding and evaluation of the strength of the mercenaries. In less than an hour, Kai Gitsai reported everything he had seen and heard, especially everything he had talked about with the Duke of Loyalty. Then, he kowtowed to the ground with a respectful expression, waiting for the emperor to deal with him. Jiaoji was destroyed just like that, and Lily was captured alive? Zhu Qizhen said in a daze. It could be seen that the high and mighty Zhu Qizhen's expression wasn't too good. Even when the Great Ming dynasty was at its peak, it was impossible for them to crush Jiaoji like they did with the mercenaries. Perhaps the Great Ming dynasty's ideology of moderation played a role in this. They never had the thought of destroying other countries. But no matter what, they couldn't do anything to Jiaoji. Now, however, the mercenaries easily destroyed them. Even the old King Lily fell into the hands of the mercenaries and became their prisoner. Judging others by their own standards, how could he not feel a trace of sadness when he thought about such a thing? If the mercenaries could destroy Jiaoji so easily, wouldn't it be a huge headache if they became the enemy of the Great Ming dynasty? What was going on with Yang Qindong? Why didn't he see that he had this kind of ability before? Was it really just a coincidence that he saved the mercenary leader who had never appeared before, and that's how he gained his current power? At this moment, countless thoughts appeared in Zhu Qizhen's mind. He actually felt a faint sense of worry in his heart. Zhu Qizhen was speechless for a long time. Chao Jixiang, who was at the side, saw this and guessed the reason. This was also a skill of the head eunuch. If he couldn't guess the emperor's thoughts, he wouldn't be far from being marginalized. In the eyes of the eunuchs, the emperor was their sky and their earth. Naturally, no accidents could happen to him. Chao Jixiang only hesitated for a moment before advising, "Your Majesty, Jiaoji is a small country with a population of less than 2 million. Compared to the Great Ming dynasty, its cities are like fireflies competing with the bright moon. How can they be compared to the sun? Even if the mercenaries came to occupy our Great Ming dynasty, they wouldn't have the strength to do so. It's just that the mercenaries reminded us that we have to become stronger ourselves." The first part of his words was to enlighten Zhu Qizhen, while the latter part was hinting at him. Sadness wouldn't solve the problem. Only by developing oneself and strengthening oneself would one be able to do so. To be able to become the emperor, one's wisdom was naturally not something ordinary people could compare to. Just now, he couldn't think straight, which was why he revealed a worried expression. Now that he heard Chao Jixiang's reminder, he thought about his own advantage. If he had to make an analogy, they were like an elephant and the mercenaries were like a poisonous snake. No matter how big the other party's appetite was, they wouldn't be able to swallow him in one gulp. That would only cause indigestion. Otherwise, when he dealt with the Huang bandit army, wouldn't he have taken the opportunity to do something to the Southern Ming dynasty? However, they didn't. This was already very clear. Of course, the other party's strength could increase at any time. If he couldn't grasp this opportunity to help the southern Ming dynasty rise, then it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Zhu Qizhen, who had made up his mind to become stronger, seemed to be filled with energy at this moment. Looking at the kneeling Kai Gu, he said, "Dear Minister Kai, please repeat the conditions that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage mentioned." Chapter 542. Yes, Your Majesty. Kai Gu nodded and repeated Yang Qindong's request. In the following time, Zhu Qizhen and the eunuchs discussed how much money they needed to train the new army and how many people they needed to trade. Just as Yang Qindong had expected, Zhu Qizhen did not pay much attention to population. Especially after Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were occupied by the Min King's forces. Many refugees escaped from there and were now entrenched in the southeastern provinces. There were even many who were heading towards Nanjing. According to the reports of the officials, the appearance of these refugees had greatly affected the security of other places. Their daily necessities alone were a big problem, which often gave the local officials a headache. This time, they could use the method of trading to transport these people out. As for whether this would strengthen the mercenary army, not to mention that they did not provide the population, did the mercenary army not have other ways? It was very difficult to make these refugees into an army. These people did not have enough to eat, they did not have warm clothes, and their health was generally not good. Otherwise, the southern Ming Empire would have recruited them into the army. Otherwise, the Min King's forces would not have easily let them leave their territory. In short, these people were of little value to Zhu Qizhen. Most of them were even burdens. It was a good opportunity to give them to the mercenary army and let them have a headache. It was also a good way to make them worry, so that they would not threaten him with a strong army. After thinking it through, Zhu Qizhen began to order the 3 eunuchs to count the refugee population. According to him, other than those young people with strong bodies and beautiful young women, the rest of the refugees could be used for trading. If they could exchange a large amount of money, the southern Ming Empire would have the strength to train the new army and strengthen themselves. The number of refugees had already been reported by the local officials. The number of refugees had reached 5 million. Most of them were refugees from Guangdong. Because they had been prepared for the arrival of King of Min's forces in Guangdong, they only got some fields and houses, but very few people. The number of refugees in Guangdong alone had reached nearly 3 million. Among the 5 million people, the ratio of women and men was almost equal, each taking up a third. The ratio of old people and children was also almost equal, each taking up a sixth. With this calculation, a rough result could be obtained from the accounts. The women had about 1.5 million, each 20 taels of silver, which was 30 million taels of silver. The old people had about 900,000, each 5 taels of silver, which was 4.5 million taels of silver. The children had about 900,000, each 15 taels of silver, which was 13.5 million taels of silver. The men had about 1 million, each 500,000 taels of silver, which was 50 million taels of silver. Altogether, the total population was about 4,300,000 people. If they were to trade, they would be able to obtain 98 million taels of silver. After the number came out, even Zhu Qizhen could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He didn't expect that a group of vagrants could increase his income so much. Once they had this 98 million taels of silver, the economy of the southern Ming Empire would be revitalized. Not only would they have the money to train the new army, they could also make more armor and weapons. At the same time, they could also use it to develop the country. It was not impossible for the southern Ming Empire to have a drastic change. Good, good, good. Zhu Qizhen said the word good 3 times in a row, completely revealing the excitement in his heart. Pass down my decree, order all the provinces to send all the refugees to the Songjiang prefecture. And, not only the refugees, but also those who have committed crimes and have not changed. They will also be sent to the Songjiang prefecture. Great companion, this matter will be handed over to you and beloved Minister Kai Zhong. That's right, don't forget about the Yang family's fourth brother. Immediately remove the surveillance on him and let him quickly contact the Yang family bank. Tell him the specific amount of money we can trade. Don't let them not take out enough money when the time comes. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen had already thrown the threat of Yang Qindong to the side. What he needed to do now was to let the southern Ming Empire rise again under his leadership. Zhu Qizhen's imperial edicts were passed down without the discussion of the ministers. The reason why he did this was because he did not want to give people the chance to argue. With his understanding of the ministers, once they knew that he had a human trade with the mercenaries, they would definitely stand up to stop it. Even though these ministers were already helpless against the refugees. They had read the books of sages since they were young, so they naturally wanted to learn how to be a saint. They would definitely not agree to abandon the people like this. Since they would not agree, then why did he need their permission? He was the emperor. However, there was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, not to mention that this matter involved so many people. In less than a day, the ministers below knew about this matter. Then, they hurriedly walked into the palace. Needless to say, they were here to persuade him. Regarding this, Zhu Qizhen was already prepared. He used his body as an excuse and refused to meet anyone. As for whether they would make a fuss when they did not see him, it was up to them. If it were not for the Southern Ming Empire's ancestral teachings that there was no need to punish a doctor, he really did not mind looking for a few people at this time to kill the prestige of those ministers who only knew how to eat, drink, and enjoy every day and were useless at critical times. After the imperial edict was passed down, the first to benefit was naturally the Yang family's fourth master, Yang. He was originally staying in Jianing Prefecture. Suddenly, a group of embroidered uniform guards came and took him away from the Yang family's ancestral home without any explanation. This scene was seen by many people at that time. Originally, Jianing Prefecture's magistrate, Li Daotong, wanted to stop it because he knew that this person was the brother of the Duke of Loyal and Courageous. Once something happened in his territory, how could he get away with it? However, when he appeared with a group of magistrates and saw that they were all embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes, black gauze hats, imperial belts, and embroidered spring sabers at their waists, he immediately became terrified. These were all the emperor's people. If he dared to stand out and say half a word, he was afraid that he would be arrested together with them. Seeing that Li Daotong did not even dare to breathe loudly, Yang did not blame him. In fact, he had already prepared for this scene in front of him. He had always heard about some of the things that his sixth brother had done. His achievements were so great that the Yang family would be implicated sooner or later. Therefore, along the way, Yang did not shout or make a fuss. He just followed the embroidered uniform guards and left Jianing Prefecture. His cooperation also saved him from physical pain. Not long after leaving Jianing, another group of embroidered uniform guards came and announced that this time, it was Emperor Yingzong who invited him to Nanjing to be an official. With the arrival of these embroidered uniform guards, his treatment also improved. At least, no one gave him any face in front of his face. As soon as he entered Nanjing, he was placed in a small courtyard and detained. Although his personal freedom was not restricted, and no one would stop him even if he wanted to go out shopping, there were always embroidered uniform guards following him. However, there were always some embroidered uniform guards following him, which made him realize that he was being watched. Thinking about it, the reason why these people did not make a move on him was probably because his sixth brother's power was flourishing. Before things were settled, they did not want to anger his sixth brother. Just like this, less than 20 days later, an imperial edict suddenly appeared in front of him. He was specially appointed by Emperor Yingzong as the general representative of the Yang family bank in southern Ming. For a time, all the embroidered uniform guards around him withdrew. This time, they really withdrew. No one came to monitor him. He, who had just regained his freedom, saw the current head of the eunuchs, Chao Jixiang, appear in front of him. First, he comforted him for a while. Then, he talked about the problem of the population trade between southern Ming and the Duke of Zhongdan. He also asked him to quickly choose a location in Nanjing, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jianing Prefecture and then raise money. Although it was mostly used to describe women, it could also be used to describe Yang Yang's current situation. Just as Chao Jixiang left with his people, a platoon of cold soldiers appeared in front of him. The person leading them was the platoon leader, Silver Tiger. This person had stayed in the Yang family manor outside Baiming's capital and was one of Yang Qindong's trusted subordinates. Silver Tiger's arrival was not only to protect fourth master Yang Yang's safety, but also to help him prepare the Yang family bank. Many contacts with the security bureau had to go through his hands. This was not because Yang Qindong did not trust his fourth brother, but because he did not want his fourth brother to be involved in dangerous matters. The news that Southern Ming was going to trade people with the mercenaries spread like a gust of wind. For a time, the various powers had different reactions. When the news reached Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, who was the acting head, was silent at first. Then, he loudly reprimanded Zhu Qizhen in front of his civil and military officials. Since the founding of the Great Ming, our Great Ming has benefited tens of thousands of people. We are determined to let them live a good life. When did we ever trade people? This Zhu Qizhen clearly doesn't care about the rules of our ancestors. At this moment, Zhu Qiyu was already on the same level as Zhu Qizhen. He no longer called him great mastering like before. At the very least, he would call him elder cousin. Instead, he directly called him by his name. Zhu Qiyu sat on the golden dragon throne and raged. The officials below all lowered their heads and did not say anything. When the Great Ming was first established, there were indeed some rules. For example, there were no political marriages, no tribute, the Son of Heaven guarded the country, the king died for the country, and so on. This was already a lot more unyielding compared to other dynasties. However, there was no such thing as trading people was prohibited in these rules. Not to mention, in order to survive, the Southern Ming even gave the title of king with a different surname. What did it matter if they traded people for military funds? Chapter 543. It was said that Southern Baiming was of the same origin, but in reality, they were already two different countries. What would Southern Ming do? How could they still care about Baiming's attitude? All of the courtiers were clear about this matter, so no one would foolishly accuse him of anything. They would just let the emperor vent his dissatisfaction. Not to mention, they didn't know whether this dissatisfaction was due to jealousy. Perhaps Dai Zong also wanted to trade with the people to get some money to spend. After all, who would complain about having more money in the national treasury? Although Baiming had already started paying business taxes, Just Immortal Abode, Sky Beyond Heaven, and Yang Family Bank paid a lot of business taxes every month. Now, they were also doing business with Walla. Baiming was heavily taxed. This made Baiming's national treasury much more abundant than Southern Ming's. It was just that during this period of time, because of the development of the cannons and guns, they had spent quite a lot of money. More importantly, the progress was still very slow. Based on the current speed, it was unknown how much money they would have to invest in order to achieve results. If there was a new source of income, Zhu Qiyu would definitely be very happy. After Zhu Qiyu said all this, it was possible that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them. Once Southern Ming became strong with money, it was also possible that they would threaten Baiming. As for which one it was, who among the officials could say for sure? No one said anything. This made it difficult for Zhu Qiyu to continue his plan of using this matter to ruin Zhu Qizhen's reputation. He, who was already a bit upset, could only wave his hand and announce that the court was dismissed. All of the officials knelt and said, "Long live the emperor." Then, they left. Only Jining, the chief eunuch, stood there without moving. He was originally supposed to serve the emperor. Since Zhu Qiyu didn't leave, he naturally didn't dare and couldn't leave. Beloved official Jin, don't you think Zong's actions are inappropriate? Now that there were no outsiders, Zhu Qiyu was no longer as angry as before. On the contrary, she was very calm and even changed the way she addressed Zhu Qizhen. Jining, who was standing respectfully at the side, was also somewhat unsure of Zhu Qiyu's thoughts. After all, things had happened too quickly. The news had just spread over there, and Zhu Qiyu had already flown into a rage. Jining didn't have time to understand too much. Now that he was asked, he could only speak in a probing tone, "Your Majesty, why don't this official find some people to punish that person in the south?" There's no need for that. Zhu Qiyu hesitated for a while, but in the end, she rejected this method. Presumably, there are some things that we don't need to do, and there will be others who will do it. After all, there is no lack of scholars who call themselves saints in the world, so we don't need to get involved. I'm just curious, why do the mercenaries need so many people? Your subject has heard some rumors. It is said that the mercenaries are engaged in various business transactions on the sea, including human trafficking. It was said that there were some places overseas that were vast but sparsely populated, so some people wanted to move some people there to grow food. Of course, this is just what this official has heard, and there is no proof. As the emperor's personal servant, the most important job was to relieve the emperor's worries, so she had to know all kinds of news. Just like what she had just said, it was a piece of news reported by a little eunuch before the court. Of course, Jining didn't know that this news was originally deliberately spread by Yang Qindong on behalf of the Security Bureau. He was just trying to confuse the public. Anyway, it was just a rumor, so it didn't take much effort. As for whether others believed it or not, it didn't matter so much. Overseas, that's quite possible. Zhu Qiyu nodded gently after hearing this. Because she didn't know, she had no right to speak. The Great Ming dynasty had been forbidden from going to the sea for many years. Regarding the matters overseas, she had only heard about it from the elders. As for the specifics, her impression was very vague. Therefore, since she didn't know the situation outside the sea, Zhu Qiyu didn't express any opinions on this matter. Instead, she suddenly changed the topic and asked, "Beloved official Jean, how many families are there in Baiming now, and how many idle people are there?" Jining was still thinking about why she didn't take advantage of this opportunity to criticize the southern Ming emperor, Zhu Qizhen. When she suddenly heard Zhu Qiyu's question, it was as if a huge thunderbolt flashed in her mind. She immediately understood the meaning of her master's words. It seemed that she also intended to follow suit. Ever since Zhu Qiyu ascended to the throne, she vigorously encouraged the people to have more children and increase the population. The results were quite good. With the emergence of a high-yield domestic crop like potatoes, and the fact that Baiming originally didn't have as much territory as the southern Ming dynasty, it was normal for her to do this. It could be imagined that if this continued, in a dozen years, the population of Baiming would greatly increase. If she could use these people to trade for silver to develop Baiming, it could be considered a path to advancement. As for why Zhu Qiyu didn't do this now, it was clear that she wanted to see how the wind would blow and how much resistance there would be. This was also why Zhu Qiyu didn't arrange for people to criticize Zhu Qizhen. After thinking through everything, Jining only hesitated for a moment before replying, "Your Majesty, the southern Ming dynasty has just experienced internal strife and war, so there are more refugees. However, we have always been peaceful here and don't have that many idle people. Of course, there are still quite a few of them in the prison. They are all criminals who committed crimes during the rebellion in the capital. If we were to gather them together, we would be able to gather 50,000 of them. Most importantly, they are mostly adult men." The last sentence was to tell, or perhaps remind Zhu Qiyu, that although there weren't many idle people, they were the most valuable people. One person could be exchanged for 50 taels of silver. 50,000 people would be 2,500,000 taels of silver. Yes, we still have to deal with the matter of public order. It's true that we don't have internal strife in Baiming, but we have to take precautions. It was clear that Zhu Qiyu wasn't very satisfied with the number of 50,000 taels. After all, it wasn't even 10 million taels of silver. The effect it could have was still too small. Hearing that they had to deal with public order, that meant that they had to punish more people. If that was the case, there would be more criminals in the future. Then, they could make a large sum of money in transactions. Jining, who understood the emperor's meaning, quickly nodded and said, "Yes, I will discuss this matter with Minister Su of the Ministry of Justice." Good. He didn't say much and only nodded slightly. After all, as the emperor, he couldn't be too unsightly when eating. It could be said that Zhu Qizhen's actions had provoked Zhu Qiyu a little. He was worried that the southern Ming dynasty would suddenly develop after obtaining large amounts of gold and silver. For this, he also needed to expand his financial resources. Otherwise, the strength of the two sides might develop in the wrong direction. However, no one would have thought that because of Zhu Qizhen's human trafficking, the public order in Baiming had improved greatly. Some of the Baiming men who usually stole chickens and dogs and committed crimes were often thrown into jail because of small crimes. Unless their families were willing to spend money to redeem them, no one else had any intention of letting them out. As these people were arrested, more people were alerted. The public order in the city and on the streets gave people a new feeling. Min Palace. Min King Zhu Huiping also received news about the human trafficking in the southern Ming dynasty. Compared to Baiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, who wanted to wait and see, his attitude was much more direct. Send someone to check if there are any homeless people who don't have enough to eat in our territory. Also, arrest those who should be arrested. Don't be polite. In addition, send someone to Jiaoji and contact the Duke of Zhongdan to see if he is interested in trading with us. Even though he knew that doing this would attract the reprimand and dissatisfaction of some so-called scholars and even old teachers, Zhu Huiping, who wanted to develop, didn't care so much. Originally, he and the southern Ming dynasty had a hostile relationship. Now that the enemy had reached this step and the treasury was full, they were about to become stronger. Then why couldn't he also take advantage of this matter? However, Min King's faction was in the process of expansion and stabilization. They also needed a large number of people to farm or work. There really weren't any extra people. Alright, this wasn't a big deal. Those who were willing to work hard would be used first, but those who were idling around had to be captured. Once enough people were gathered, they would naturally be able to trade with the mercenaries for gold and silver. Therefore, after Baiming, the public order in most of Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong under Min King's faction had improved. This was something that Yang Qindong didn't expect before. At this time, Yang Qindong also received news from the front. When he learned that the southern Ming dynasty wanted to take out more than 4 million people to trade with him, he was stunned at first. Then, he laughed happily. Originally, he thought that even if something as big as human trafficking could be done, because of the existence of those old teachers, there wouldn't be much success in the beginning. Even if Zhu Qizhen lacked money, he couldn't go too far in the environment where the Confucians were the center. It was just that he never thought that Zhu Qizhen would be so bold when doing things. He actually transacted more than 4 million people in one go. This was completely beyond his expectations, and he never thought that it would happen. Immediately send a ship to Qiqian City to inform Yu Qian. Tell him to send more silver. Also, build more houses and prepare more clothes and food. Also, inform the navy to prepare more transport ships, the more the better. Yang Qindong excitedly stood up and continuously gave orders to Tiger's Mane, who was standing at the side. Oh right, call Yang San over. This time, so many people came at once. It is impossible for the southern Ming dynasty to not arrange for spies. Tell him to arrange people to keep an eye on suspicious people. Don't let the situation in Qiqian City be exposed. Yang Qindong thought for a while and added. Chapter 544. This time, there were more than 4 million people involved in the transaction. With such a large population, it would be too much work to completely screen out the spies sent by the southern Ming Empire. Since that was the case, it would be better not to screen them but to control them from the source. Once they entered Crimson City, they would not be released until they were thoroughly investigated. This way, Even if the spies obtained the information they wanted, it would be useless if they could not upload it to Ryukyu Island. With so many Han citizens in his hands, it was obvious that the manpower in Crimson City would definitely be sufficient. As long as these newcomers were given time to get used to each other, it would not be long before a large number of useful people would appear under him. At that time, it would be time for him to expand greatly. Tiger's Mane went out to handle some matters. Yang Qindong was still a little excited and could not sit still. Looking at Beta Persei standing beside him, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Oh right, is there any news from the Lansang Kingdom?" "Young master, not yet," Beta Persei said in a low voice. He had no choice but to lower his voice. His voice was a little too loud. If he did not lower his voice, who knew if he would be frightened by the young master? If that happened, the young master would be scolded again. "Not yet." "Then go and tell the messenger in charge of contacting the Lansang Kingdom to give them 10 days. If there is still no news, then we will have to go and capture them ourselves." With so many Han citizens, Yang Qindong could be said to be full of confidence. If the Lansang Kingdom wanted to continue to be perfunctory, he did not mind sending troops to destroy them. Although the time was not completely ripe yet, if he squeezed a little, it could be considered as barely occupying another country. Yang Qindong's tone became a lot more vigorous. When the news reached the Kanglan Kingdom, King Paisai became nervous. Who was Yang Qindong? He was the general of the mercenary army. The powerful Jiaoji Kingdom had been destroyed so easily. In comparison, in terms of military strength, they were slightly weaker than Jiaoji, although he did not want to admit this fact. Previously, Jiaoji was the scapegoat for sending assassins to assassinate Yang Qindong, and was annihilated just like that. Now that Fan Yuhai was in Kanglan Kingdom, this excuse absolutely could not fall into the hands of the other party. General Sangwang was called and Paisai inquired about it. Sangwang La, the representative general of the Laos, was just like Lodi, the general of the Laos who had fallen into a trap. The only difference was that he was representing the interests of the Laos. "Your Majesty, General Sisi is having a meeting with General Fan Yuhai. It's just that according to the news from the front, some of what General Fan said is not without reason." Sangwang La first bowed to Paisai, then told him what he had just learned. The so-called General Sexi is also one of the famous generals of the Lansang Kingdom. He represents the interests of the old dragon clan. "What did General Fan Yuhai say?" Paisai asked with a deep expression. "Your Majesty, General Fan said that since the mercenaries can find a reason to annihilate Jiaoji, they can also find a reason to deal with our Lansang Kingdom in the future. In other words, this war will be fought sooner or later. Since that's the case, why don't we take advantage of the fact that the enemy is tired from the battle and suddenly attack? At least we will have the upper hand, and General Fan Yuhai will fully support us when the time comes. It's equivalent to having one more ally and more strength." Sangwang La said as he carefully observed King Paisai's expression. King Paisai fell silent when he heard this. How could he not know this? In the words of the Han people, this was called, without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. However, the mercenaries were pressing him. If he did not hand over Fan Yuhai, he would be in trouble. The current Lansang Kingdom was not ready for war yet. Especially after the defeat of General Lodi's 100,000 soldiers, the entire kingdom was afraid of war when the mercenaries were mentioned. If they did not get rid of this fear, how could they fight the next war? Seeing Paisai standing there in silence, Sangwang La spoke softly. Sangwang La, who was watching from the side, whispered, "Your Majesty, why don't we tell the mercenaries that Fan Yuhai escaped with his soldiers and we didn't catch him? This way, at least on the surface, they will not be able to find trouble with us. Unless they want to deal with us in the first place, then there is no need for a reason at all. Is that okay?" Paisai asked without confidence. "Why not? To put it bluntly, we are already giving them face by doing this. We are not a vassal state of the mercenaries. Why do we have to listen to them? We have already done our part by giving them a way out. Again, unless they really want to be our enemy, then no matter what we do, we will not be able to avoid a war. On the other hand, if they don't intend to use force against us, they won't make things difficult for us over this matter. After all, they are still 20,000 soldiers, and they are the most elite soldiers of Jiaoji. They are a force to be reckoned with, Sang Wenla said with a confident look on his face. In fact, since the mercenaries sent people to ask about Fan Yuhai, the relationship between the two sides became tense. Everyone knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later. It was just that the result of this war was sooner or later. Since that was the case, there was no need to make any concessions. At most, they would just fight. At least if they fought now, they would have 20,000 more soldiers. On the other hand, if they only wanted to curry favor with the mercenaries, Fan Yuhai's 20,000 soldiers would not be easy to deal with. The Lansang kingdom did not know how much they would have to pay. Alright, then go and arrange for someone to talk to the mercenary emissary. Right, tell the army to be on alert. King Paisai touched his forehead and said with a headache. Where did these mercenaries come from? How did they suddenly appear and destroy his neighbor, Jiaoji? All of this happened too quickly, and the pressure it gave him was too great. It actually made him feel like he was in a dilemma. Yang Qindong, who was in the neighboring country, received news about the Lansang kingdom 2 days later. After hearing the reply, he laughed and put the matter aside. The Lansang king was also smart. He knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later, so he did not agree to his request. That was fine, he could just put it aside first. It was just an extra 20,000 soldiers from Fan Yuhai, so the mercenaries did not put them in their eyes. As for not looking for trouble now, it did not mean that they would not look for trouble in the future. The most important thing now was to get the 4.3 million Han people to Ryukyu Island first. Yang Qindong retracted his gaze from the Lansang kingdom and even called back the representative he had sent. He ordered the security bureau to send back the news from the Songjiang prefecture of the Southern Ming Empire in a timely manner. After requesting an update every day, he placed all his attention on the integration of the army. After the destruction of the Huang bandits and the Battle of Jiaoji, the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front and a few auxiliary battalions had expanded to more than 10,000 people. After the accumulation of military achievements and the improvement of personal military qualities, the auxiliary soldiers had the opportunity to become Cold Front soldiers. After the various tests began, more and more people with the ability to pass the test joined Ling Feng's team. The auxiliary soldiers' assessment to become Cold Front soldiers was given to the 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe and Political Commissar Kong Jie. Yang Qindong's main focus was on the officers' assessment. One of the most important points was the establishment of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. Yes, now that the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, 3 battalions and a regiment, a total of 1,300 people, had been established, it was time to choose a new regiment commander. There were 3 candidates for the position of regiment commander. They were the original 1st Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo, and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. Whether it was the destruction of the Huang bandits or the Battle of Jiaoji, the 3 battalion commanders had performed well. If not for the fact that the Cold Front was not strong enough, all 3 of them would have had the qualifications to be regiment commander. However, since the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front was newly established, there was only one position for regiment commander. Naturally, it was impossible for all 3 of them to be regiment commanders. In the end, Yang Qindong made some choices and balanced them out, promoting the 3 battalion commanders to different degrees. After the reshuffling, the 2nd Regiment commander was still Luo Pe, who was also the commander of the 2nd Regiment's 1st Battalion. Political Commissar Kong Jie was still the same. The original 3rd Battalion commander Kong Chuanxin was promoted to the 2nd Regiment's Chief of Staff, becoming a deputy regiment commander. The position of 3rd Battalion commander was given to 1st Company Commander Tian Su, who had performed the best. The new regiment commander of the 3rd Regiment, Wu Sheng, was also the commander of the 3rd Regiment's 1st Battalion. Political Commissar Chen Bo was also the commander of the 2nd Battalion. 3rd Battalion Commander Chun Yang, who was originally a company commander of the 2nd Battalion, was also promoted. In addition, the original reconnaissance company was promoted to a reconnaissance battalion, and the 1st Battalion commander was Su Yunsheng, who was originally a company commander. After the reshuffling, Wu Sheng, Chen Bo, and Kong Chuanxin were promoted to regiment commander and deputy regiment commander respectively. It was a happy ending for everyone. Don't worry about scarcity, worry about inequality. There were only so many positions, so it was no wonder that Yang Qindong wanted to divide the spoils. Having been in the army before, he knew very well that the relationship between officers was that of good buddies and iron comrades in arms, but at the same time, there was also a competitive relationship. If this subtle relationship was not handled well, it could lead to a big mistake. Fortunately, Yang Qindong's prestige was enough. After this distribution, everyone was happy. Even Chief of Staff Kong Chuanxin, who was only promoted by half a rank, didn't show the slightest displeasure. This made Yang Qindong feel relieved. The original 1 regiment of Cold Front was expanded into 2 regiments. At this moment, the auxiliary troops also grew stronger. Originally, there were only 12 battalions. Even after transferring a regiment of soldiers to Lengfeng, they still managed to expand to 15 battalions due to the temporary addition of auxiliary soldiers. On the other hand, the temporary auxiliary troops were reduced from the original 14 battalions to 6 battalions. After passing the test, they would directly become auxiliary troops. Chapter 545. This was because the mercenary army was temporarily not recruiting. Otherwise, there would be many young men in Jiaoji who would want to join the army. After all, the treatment and conditions of the mercenary army were too good, making people envious. However, in order to ensure the purity of the army, Yang Qindong did not have the intention of letting other foreign races join. If he really needed temporary auxiliary soldiers, the Southern Ming Empire had prepared a total of 4.5 million people for him. Among them, the proportion of adult men was more than 1 million. At that time, he would not be able to get as many as he wanted. After this round of adjustment, nearly a month had passed. At this time, the coast of the Southern Ming Empire's Songjiang Prefecture could be said to be a busy scene. For nearly a month, the Yangtze Navy had been doing the transportation work. Later on, when the Southern Ming dynasty opened the prison cells in the various prefectures and sold the 200,000 prisoners to the mercenaries, the total number of people involved in this transaction reached 4.5 million, and the transaction amount also reached 99 million taels of silver. Because the Great Ming Empire did not pay attention to commerce and focused on agriculture, their annual tax revenue was only 10 million. After deducting the official's salary and various expenses, the total amount of money that could be deposited into the national treasury was only 6 to 8 million. It could be said that the Great Ming Empire was not rich. Even compared to the weaker Song dynasty, the national treasury's annual income was more than 15 million. In addition, the Great Ming Empire was now divided into the north and south. After the Southern Ming Empire lost 3 provinces' taxes, the national treasury's annual income was only a pitiful 3 million. This time, the Southern Ming Empire's emperor, Zhu Qizhen, could imagine how rich and imposing the Southern Ming Empire's emperor Yingzong would feel. When the last batch of people were sent onto the Yang family navy's transport ship, and the last sum of money was delivered to the chief eunuch Chao Jixiang by Yang Yang's hands, the Southern Ming Empire's vigorous new army training had begun. Various kinds of bustling weapon factories had also appeared. With money in the national treasury, the various departments of the Southern Ming Empire also began to complain about being poor. Facing this situation, Zhu Qizhen, who was in a great mood, waved his pen and approved all those who had a legitimate reason to ask for money. For a time, the entire upper echelons of the Southern Ming dynasty were in a jubilant mood. As for those who criticized Zhu Qizhen for trading people, there were much fewer voices. Unlike the nouveau riche mentality of the Southern Ming dynasty, the original capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi City, had a newly built commercial street that was soon open for business. At this moment, Yang Qindong had changed the name of Jiaoji to Vietnam, which would be their name in the future. Originally, Yang Qindong wanted to change it to Yunnan province. However, considering the feelings of the two emperors, he didn't provoke them and didn't do it immediately. The commercial street was fully prepared by the first officer of the Vietnam region, Song Zhe, and opened for business. The entire street was 1,500 meters long and there were over 100 shops of different sizes. Here, one could see all kinds of items sold by the mercenaries, such as toothpaste, toothbrushes, toilet paper, soap, chewing gum, white sugar, and all kinds of condiments. There were all kinds of new types of clothing, outerwear, qipao, women's underwear, glasses, and all kinds of packaged drinks. There were also instant noodles, ham sausages, and all kinds of portable canned food, canned pork shoulder, preserved vegetables with pork, for happiness meatballs, mushroom meat sauce, sweet and sour pork ribs, red braised pork. There were also high-grade divine objects, mirrors, floor clocks, perfumes, and sets of beautifully packaged cosmetics, lipsticks, and so on. As long as one entered the commercial street, one would immediately be dazzled by the dazzling lineup. The nearby merchants who heard the news could only hate that they didn't have enough eyes and hated that they didn't have enough money on them. Although the prices of the items sold in the commercial street were not high, the demand still exceeded the supply. Especially the divine objects like the mirror and the floor clocks. The former was priced at 100,000 taels of silver, while the latter was priced at 200,000 taels of silver. Soon, more than a dozen of such good things were sold. This was because the merchants didn't bring much money with them. Otherwise, they would have sold as many as they had. Think about it, how many nobles were there in a country? Even if a noble only wanted one, the country could sell hundreds and thousands of them. The most important thing was that these items were only sold by the mercenaries. As for imitating them after they bought them, it was like casually finding something from the clock. That would be enough for them to study for a long time. Once they finished their research, there would be a new product in the Crimson Nest City. Once the items were sold, it represented a large amount of money. In this era of monopoly, what was even more hateful was that there was no need to pay taxes. In just a short 7 days, the total amount of transactions reached 50 million taels of silver. This was only the first batch, because there were already many merchants who said that they would immediately return to their countries to prepare their money and prepare to come again. With regards to these potential customers, the mercenaries naturally welcomed them. In order to provoke them, Song Zhe intentionally spread the news that good items were limited. If they came late, they might not be able to buy them even if they had money. As a result, those merchants left Vietnam without stopping. They only wanted to return to their countries to deal with the items in their hands and bring more money to Crimson Nest City. The 50 million taels of silver were left for daily expenses. The total amount of 50 million taels of silver was loaded onto the ship by Yang Qindong. Then, he personally led 2 cold vanguard platoons and 14 auxiliary battalions to Ryukyu Island. Considering the importance of Vietnam, and the fact that Yuan Chuncheng, Hong Jin, and Chen Di had not completely stopped the rebellion of the Jiaoji army, Yang Qindong left behind a cold vanguard platoon, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 6 temporary auxiliary battalions for Song Zhe to use. At the same time, he also left behind 50,000 educated youths in Crimson Nest City. With them, the prosperity of Jiaoji, which was now Vietnam, was just around the corner. This time, Yang Qindong did not leave with great fanfare. After all, he was still the loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty. He still had to consider some things. However, when he stood on the bow of the ship and looked at the waves below his feet, he couldn't help but feel extremely excited as he got closer and closer to Crimson City. The last time he left Crimson Nest City was in 1448 AD. Now, it was already the 10th month of 1451 AD. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Although he had been reading various reports about Crimson Nest City and had a certain understanding of the development there, he did not see it personally. After all, he did not see it with his own eyes. His heart was filled with anticipation. On the large ship, the 2nd Marine Regiment's commander Nie Tong, the 2nd Marine Regiment's commander Luo Pe, the 3rd Marine Regiment's commander Wu Sheng, and the others were accompanying Yang Qindong. Each and every one of them was in high spirits, as if they were returning home in glory. Commander Nie, how is the situation on the island? The Shang dynasty should have been suppressed for a long time. After enjoying the sea breeze for a while, Yang Qindong calmed down a little. He turned to look at Commander Nie Tong. The reason why Yang Qindong wanted to make a trip to Crimson Nest City was not only to see how the development there was, but also to provide appropriate technical guidance. Of course, this guidance referred to taking out some relevant books. Previously, he did not give out too profound books because he was afraid that those people would not be able to understand and would be misled. Another reason was to completely take over Ryukyu Island. Originally, he was worried about the lack of population. Even if he destroyed the Shang dynasty, he would not be able to control it well. However, it was different now. With the 5 million people from the southern Ming dynasty, although they could not use all of them, at least half of them would be sufficient. Hearing Yang Qindong ask about the situation of the Shang dynasty, Nie Tong immediately came over and said excitedly, "Sixth young master, everything is ready. Our brothers have said that under the joint attack of the army and navy, the Shang dynasty would be completely destroyed in 3 days." Very good. Hearing this answer, Yang Qindong laughed heartily in satisfaction. Since he came to this world, it had only been 3 years. However, he had changed too much. Once the foundation was laid, it would be the time for the Han race to soar into the world. The new pier of Crimson Nest City was currently filled with people. Many people were standing on the newly built cement plaza and looking into the distance. This was also because Division Master Leng Song was leading the team to maintain public order. Some unnecessary people had already been cleared away and went back to doing what they were supposed to do. Otherwise, the number of people waiting here would have increased exponentially. However, some people could be persuaded to leave, but some people could not be persuaded at all. For example, there were a few madams standing under a large umbrella. Although it was already October, when the sun was at its peak in the afternoon, it would still feel hot when the sun shone on one's body. The umbrellas were only used to prevent the sun from shining on them. Hu Yan, Madame Xue, and Hu Man were waiting there with their respective maids Xiao Qing, Xiao Wei, and Xiao Yun. About 50 meters away from them, there was a tall young lady in military attire who was also standing there and looking up. This lady was wearing a camouflage military uniform with the insignia of a major. She stood there with her back straight. Perhaps because she was exposed to the sun often, her skin was not very white. Strictly speaking, it was still a healthy, wheat-like complexion. It was precisely because of this that when her large eyes blinked, she appeared to be more spirited and had an indescribable heroic temperament. She was the head of the Crimson Nest City's military propaganda department, Wan Xiaoyu. She was the girl that Yang Qindong hugged 3 years ago. However, compared to that time, she was now nearly 1.6 meters tall. One must know that she was not yet 14 years old, but she already had a pair of long legs. If she continued to grow in this way, it would be easy for her to reach 1.7 meters tall. Chapter 546. Her body proportions were already very good to begin with, and with the addition of the military uniform, it added a bit of temperament. If it wasn't for the fact that she still looked somewhat immature, it was likely that any man who saw her would inevitably be unable to walk. But even if she wasn't 14 years old, in the entire Qiqian city, who knew how many men secretly liked her? If it wasn't for the rumor that she liked the god of Qiqian city, and that Lord God also liked her, it was likely that those who came to ask for her hand in marriage would have already trampled over her doorstep. It wasn't strange, in that era, there were many women who got married at the age of 14, and there were even some who became mothers at this age. But Wan Xiaoyu was not an ordinary person. Not only was it rumored that she had a good relationship with Lord God, just based on the status of the Wan family in Qiqian city, it was something that few people could compare to. Wan Xiaoqin's brother, Wan Qi, was now the manager of the power plant. Wan Xiaoqin's mother, Zhou Hua, was now the manager of the garment factory. Even her brother, Wan Xiaoqin, was now a battalion-level instructor, and also had the military rank of major. A family of 4, all of them were officers, and their ranks were not low. How could an ordinary person be worthy of a woman from such a family? Not to mention, Wan Xiaoyu had always been very proud, and her heart had long been stolen away when she first met Yang Qindong. How could she put anyone else in her eyes? If it wasn't for the fact that she was on military duty and couldn't leave the island, she would have already gone to the great Ming dynasty to find her sweetheart. As a matter of fact, knowing that Yang Qindong was going to return to the island to investigate, she had long since arrived at the new pier to wait. And in the process of waiting, her eyes would occasionally look at Hu Yan and the other women not far away. Wan Xiaoyu knew that these 3 women were the wives and concubines of Lord God. This news had long spread after they came to the island. For this matter, her mother, Zhou Hua, had already told her more than once to get closer to the 3 madams when she had the time. After all, they would all be serving the same master in the future, and if she built a good relationship now, she wouldn't be at a disadvantage in the future. This was one of the benefits of a man in a feudal society. As long as one had the ability to marry a few concubines, there was absolutely no problem. Not only would no one criticize you, but they would also think that it was right and proper. After all, capable people needed women to give birth to their children, didn't they? It was just that Wan Xiaoyu was still a little young in the end, and her skin was a little thin. Therefore, although she knew of the existence of these 3 madams, she had never gone to visit. She also believed that these 3 madams would also know of her existence. After all, in Crimson City, she was more or less a celebrity. She didn't rely on her parents, elder brother, or her relationship with the god. As the head of the military's propaganda department, she organized many programs for the female soldiers under her, which greatly boosted the morale of the military and factory workers. More than once, she was praised by the 2 commanders, Ling Song and Gao Xiong, for her excellent performance. Even Lord Yu Qian, who was in charge of Crimson City, was full of praise for this little girl. Right, speaking of this Lord Yu, he was one of the few Yang Xia officials who didn't come to the new pier to welcome Yang Qindong. Perhaps he still didn't know how to face Yang Qindong, or perhaps he was just a workaholic, and didn't want to waste his time on this kind of exchange of favors. Instead, it was Ling Song and Gao Xiong who were already standing here. The reason why they were able to have everything they had now was completely because of Yang Qindong's recognition and promotion. Even if it was for the sake of repaying the favor, they still had to appear here. Indeed, when so many people were waiting here, under everyone's anticipation, the shadow of a large ship finally appeared in the distance. Then, they heard someone loudly shout, "The ship is here." This shout attracted everyone's attention. Even the 3 madams who had been sitting under the large umbrella couldn't help but stand up, expressing the anxiety and anticipation in their hearts. The ship that Yang Qindong was on was a new type of ship, powered by coal, and its speed was naturally extremely fast. In less than an hour, the ship had already arrived at the new pier, and began to slowly approach the shore. At the new pier, there were already Navy personnel directing and carrying out the security work. Although Crimson City was Yang Xia's base, and there shouldn't be anyone who could threaten Yang Qindong here. However, for the sake of safety, the necessary security work still had to be done. Just like when the ship approached the shore, the first and second guards came down first, and took over and supplemented the security work. After the security work was arranged, Yang Qindong walked out of the ship with Luo Pe and Nia Yong, and came to the new pier. When his footsteps landed on the new pier, Yang Qindong felt a very strong sense of security. He couldn't help but feel better, and laughed heartily. Husband. As soon as Yang Qindong stepped into the cement square in front of the pier, Hu Yan had already come over with the 3rd madam, Lady Xue, and the 5th madam, Su Man. Madam, thank you for your hard work. Seeing Hu Yan and the other 2 women coming over together, Yang Qindong even grinned. Then, in front of everyone, he opened his arms and hugged Hu Yan, who was walking in front, in his arms. This action was naturally emotional. Although they hadn't been separated for a long time, they had experienced a lot, and it gave people a feeling of being separated for a long time. In addition, Yang Qindong was an emotional person, so at this moment, he naturally didn't suppress his emotions. However, such an action was still a bit exaggerated in the eyes of others. Some of the surrounding security guards and Navy soldiers couldn't help but quickly turn their heads in other directions. Obviously, for them, such an action was still a bit too much. At that time, even if there was something between husband and wife, they had to go back to the boudoir to do it. In front of outsiders, hugging was already considered an immoral thing. Once some old masters saw it, they would inevitably be lectured, or even punished. However, Yang Qindong didn't have such awareness. This was just a hug in public. Compared to the later generations who dared to kiss on the street, this was really nothing. This hug made Hu Yan very happy, but she was also a little shy. Her cheeks were red, and she whispered in Yang Qindong's ear, "Husband, many people are watching. Besides, if you want a hug, you can't just hug me. There are also 2 sisters." This was the demeanor of a first wife. Her husband had other women. Not only could she not stop it, but she also had to pretend to be very magnanimous. Even if this magnanimity was just a pretense, she had to keep up the pretense. Otherwise, the title of a jealous woman would fall on her head. Listening to Hu Yan whispering to him, Yang Qindong chuckled and whispered, Then I'll deal with you tonight." Then, regardless of Hu Yan's blushing face, he let go of her and hugged Madame Xue and Su Maner, who were beside him. Naturally, the 2 women's faces were bright red and glistening. After hugging the 3 women, Hu Yan walked up and pointed her chin forward slightly. "Husband, there's another sister over there." Yang Qindong looked up with some confusion and saw Wan Xiaoyu standing in the crowd. Although she was surrounded by a group of female soldiers, she still stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens, standing out from the crowd. "This is Xiaoyu? Ha, you've grown so tall." Yang Qindong's memory was good. He recognized Wan Xiaoyu when she seemed to have changed her appearance. Then, he laughed heartily and strode over. Seeing Yang Qindong walking toward her, Wan Xiaoyu's heart pounded. Then, she didn't know where she got the courage to run over and plunge into Yang Qindong's arms. Hugging Wan Xiaoyu, feeling her accelerated heartbeat and the fragrance of a young girl coming from her body, Yang Qindong couldn't help but feel emotional. The scene of the first time he saw this woman appeared in his mind. The malnourished girl who seemed to be extremely happy just by getting a piece of candy had now become a young girl and had grown up. Wan Xiaoyu felt Yang Qindong's broad chest and the warmth of his body, which made her feel intoxicated. She didn't know how many times she had imagined this scene in her heart. She just hoped that this moment would stay here forever. It was just that it was difficult for beautiful things to last forever. Not far away, 2 military officers with the rank of colonel came over. They were the 2 division commanders, Ling Song and Gao Xiong. "Okay, go to your sister whose place first. We'll catch up later." Patting Wan Xiaoyu's back, Yang Qindong said softly. "Okay." Wan Xiaoyu happily agreed. She had already understood the meaning behind these words. Since she was allowed to stay by Hu Yan's side and call her sister, didn't that mean that he had acknowledged her position? Wan Xiaoyu ran to Hu Yan and the other 2 with a red face and called them sister one by one. Then, she quickly laughed and chatted with them, becoming one of them. On this side, Ling Song and Gao Xiong had already stood in front of Yang Qindong and gave a standard military salute. Yang Qindong first returned the salute with a solemn expression. After he put down his arms, he smiled and raised his hand to punch Ling Song and Gao Xiong in the chest. "Not bad, you 2 have become a lot stronger. If there's a chance, let's spar." Feeling the sincere friendship shown by Yang Qindong, the 2 division commanders also laughed. But they didn't give any answer to this matter of sparring. Not for anything else, but because they had long heard that the sixth young master's strength had improved a lot recently. Even the entire second guard team of 20 people was no longer his opponent. Although the first guard team could still suppress him, it seemed that they wouldn't be able to last long. Sooner or later, they would be defeated. Chapter 547. Such a pervert, how could the two teachers overestimate themselves and challenge him? Although losing to the sixth young master wasn't shameful, if they were to challenge him despite knowing that they were no match for him, wouldn't that be asking for trouble? After the two division commanders, several other regimental officers came over and saluted. As for the other battalion officers, they could forget about it. With Yang Qindong's status, battalion officers would find it difficult to get close to him unless they were on a combat mission. Accompanied by Ling Song and Gao Xiong, Yang Qindong walked out of the new pier. He did not choose to sit in a carriage, but instead decided to take a stroll through the streets to see how Crimson City had changed. The cement road was 12 meters wide, and on both sides were neatly constructed cement houses. From time to time, he could even see a few tall buildings rising. All of this left Yang Qindong nodding his head in approval. This was only the outer perimeter of Crimson City, but it was already so well maintained. In terms of hygiene, Yang Qindong was particularly satisfied. In comparison, the cities of the Great Ming Dynasty were completely lacking in quality. Back in the Great Ming Dynasty, even the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty was filthy and disorderly. In terms of urban environment, the streets were cramped and filled with feces and urine, with mosquitoes and flies flying about. The sweltering heat of summer exuded an unpleasant stench, and when it rained, there would be waterlogging everywhere, causing plagues to occur from time to time. On the other hand, the streets of Crimson City were not only wide, but also clean and sanitary. Every several hundred meters, one could see a public toilet, effectively solving the problem of people going to the toilet. Of course, this was just a difference in terms of hardware. In terms of people, the streets of the Great Ming Dynasty were filled with eunuchs, prostitutes, and beggars. All sorts of ugliness reigned supreme in the world. In terms of the mental state of the citizens, there were many greedy and lazy people, and few kind and diligent people. Unlike in Resin City, there was almost no one on the streets. What he saw the most was the towering chimneys. From time to time, black smoke would come out, indicating that the factories were in operation. The workers were busy with production and self-sufficient. It could be said that the scenery here was completely different from the outside world. Yang Qindong wasn't the only one who felt this way. Even the newcomers felt the same way. Just like the 5 million Han people who arrived earlier than him, they were stunned by the beautiful scenery here. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, even the heaven in their hearts was nothing more than this. They quickly entered a temporary resting place. Although it was only a temporary house built in a rush, the conditions and environment were much better than their previous living conditions. At this moment, the people who had originally left their homes and were still resentful towards this place quickly adapted to it. Not many people thought of leaving. Not bad. The environment is good and the streets are clean. After walking for a while, they could see green grass and tall, thick, and lush trees. Yang Qindong had a satisfied look on his face. Green City was something he had considered when he first built Red Nest City. A good environment could always make people happy. In such an environment, when people were in a good mood, their efficiency in doing things would also increase. As for Yang Qindong's performance, the two teachers didn't dare to claim credit. This was all arranged by the sixth young master before he left. They were just following the instructions, so they just laughed. Alright, although the order was given by me, you guys also deserve credit for carrying it out. Yang Qindong seemed to know why the two of them were laughing, so he directly said it. Yes, thank you for the praise, sixth young master. The two teachers quickly stood up and bowed. Yang Qindong smiled and asked the two to put down their hands, then continued walking forward. At this moment, they arrived at a large factory surrounded by walls. This should be a factory, but I don't know what it is for. Replying to the sixth young master, this is the main garment factory. Leng Song explained. Oh. Hearing that it was the main garment factory, Yang Qindong nodded. Then let's go in and take a look. This was out of curiosity, and also a kind of inspection. It was a surprise inspection. However, it was obvious that Leng Song and Gao Xiong didn't have any intention of rejecting this request, nor did they show any signs of nervousness. It was obvious that they were very confident in this place and weren't afraid of inspection. Yang Qindong saw the two teachers' reactions and nodded to himself. His footsteps didn't stop as he walked into the factory with the signboard of the main garment factory. Red Nest City implemented military-style management, so there were naturally guards at the entrance of such factories. On this point, Yang Qindong learned from some factories in the future. In order to prevent some people from causing trouble, every factory had a department and organization called the security department. If the security department couldn't solve a problem, they would contact the nearby public security bureau. If they still couldn't solve it, then they would have to use the military. The guards here were very competent. If not for the factory's workers, they wouldn't be allowed to enter. It was just that this time, Yang Qindong's background was too great. Not to mention the group of people following him from afar, just the two people beside him were actually the strongest representatives of Crimson City's military. Two division commanders had come together. This lineup made the guards in charge of guarding the factory a little flustered. Then, someone immediately ran to the inner department of the factory to report. At this moment, the main garment factory was also very lively. The reason why it was called the main garment factory and not the main garment factory was because it wasn't made up of just one factory. Inside, there were the first textile factory, the second textile factory, the garment factory's underwear factory, and the military uniform factory. It was said that there were also small military and other factories arranged here. Because the scale was limited, they didn't set up their own factories. For example, in a garment factory, there were male garment factories and female garment factories. As a result, the number of workers in the main garment factory had reached 50,000. It seemed that 50,000 people in a large factory wasn't a small number. If they were divided into several branch factories, and each branch factory was still operating on 3 shifts, then this amount of people wouldn't be considered much at all. It must be known that in this era, there were simply too few machines. Most of them relied on manual labor. Fortunately, because of Yang Qindong's appearance, he had gotten some simple blueprints, and used the blacksmiths and craftsmen to make them. Furthermore, with the development and usage of electricity, the efficiency had been raised to a certain extent. However, it was clear that the number of people was still insufficient. Once the 4.5 million Han people had adapted to the environment and life here, it was destined that the garment factory would have to continue expanding, perhaps even more than double in size. The reason why it was so lively was because the factory director, Zhou Hua, as well as a few branch factory directors, had been gathered. The person who had gathered them was the current manager of Red Nest City, Yu Qian. He was here today to supervise the production of the clothes. There was no choice. With the sudden arrival of 4.5 million Han citizens, even if each of them were to make 2 sets of clothes, they would need at least 9 million sets. Furthermore, these were just outerwear. What about underwear? What was different? What was the need? It must be said that the people who came to the southern Ming Empire were all refugees. Many of them were wearing clothes that had been around for who knew how long. Therefore, things like lice and pests would definitely exist. When they entered the new pier, each of them was given an outerwear. As for their previous clothes, they were all gathered together and burned. It was just that these 4.5 million sets of clothes were still in stock from the previous garment factory. Moreover, they were not custom-made. As a result, some people's clothes were too short, while some people's clothes were a little too long for their children. There was nothing that could be done about it. After all, it had only been a little more than a month since they received the news that there were so many refugees. To be able to produce 4.5 5 million sets of clothes in such a short period of time was already not easy. Regarding this situation, Yu Qian naturally had some understanding. However, it was useless for him to understand. Right now, there were so many people waiting for a change of clothes. Being urged by his subordinates, he came to the main garment factory and gathered the directors of the branch factories to see if there was a way to solve the problem. Factory directors, I won't say too much. It's all about work. How about this? The underwear factory and the military uniform factory temporarily stop your work and focus on producing ready-made clothes to increase production. What do you think? After gathering the directors, Yu Qian stated his intentions and looked at everyone with an expectant expression. How can that be? As soon as his voice fell, a voice of objection immediately sounded. Our underwear factory is still being urged to produce goods. Lord Yu, you also know how popular our underwear is right now. We can earn a lot of money for Red Nest City. How can we stop just like that? The one who shook her head was the director of the underwear factory, Mei Ling. Like her name, Mei Ling was not only beautiful, but the underwear factory was also in good order under her leadership. It earned a lot of money for Red Nest City. Being able to earn money was where her confidence came from. Even when facing Yu Qian, the person in charge of Red Nest City, she still said whatever she wanted to say. Just as Mei Ling's voice fell, another burly man's voice sounded. The military uniform factory still has a lot of tasks that haven't been completed yet. Lord Yu, you don't know. The soldiers on the front lines are very brave, but their lives are very tough. We can't just watch them win in tattered clothes. Needless to say, the one who counterattacked was the director of the military uniform factory, Fang Lei. As a former burly man in the military, because he injured his body during training, he had no choice but to retire and work elsewhere. Under his leadership, the military uniform factory's work was very effective. Even the director of an underwear factory dared to talk back to Yu Qian, let alone a military uniform factory backed by the military. As one of the dozens of Cold Vanguard members personally trained by Yang Qindong, Fang Lei's qualifications were also extremely old. When Fang Lei spoke, he had such confidence. Chapter 548. Yu Qian's face was a bit ugly after being contradicted by two subordinates. Fortunately, he knew that this was not a personal grudge, but for work. Although he was a bit unhappy, it was still within the range that he could understand. The head of the garment factory, Zhou Hua, who had been standing at the side without saying anything, glared at Mei Ling and Fang Lei before saying in an embarrassed tone, Lord Yu, they are only speaking from a work point of view. If they have offended you in any way, please don't take it to heart. Although she was only the head of the garment factory, Zhou Hua's words were more forceful than humble. First of all, as the director of the main factory here, Zhou Hua would definitely be biased and consider the interests of the whole garment factory first. Secondly, and most importantly, who did not know the position of the Luan family in the entire Qiqian city? The head of the family was the head of the most popular power plant. His eldest son was a battalion-level political worker. His daughter was even more powerful. Not only was she the head of the propaganda department, she was also rumored to be one of the future concubines of the God Lord. So what if she was a concubine? In the entire Qiqian city, who knew how many girls wanted to have such an identity? Even being a servant girl by the God Lord's side would make many people envious. That was equivalent to being a close official. People said that the gate of the prime minister was a 7th-rank official. Because of this, who knew how many people went to the Luan family to propose marriage? If Luan Shaochen wanted to choose a wife, he would definitely be very picky. As the woman in charge of the Luan family and the head of the garment factory, Zhou Hua's position was clearly very high. Towards Zhou Hua, Yu Qian was also very respectful. Not for any other reason, but because of her ability to work. Once the higher-ups gave her a task, she would always do her best to complete it. She would even exceed the quota. If not for the fact that there were too many Han people this time, the work in the garment factory would have been very satisfactory. AI. Letting out a long sigh, Yu Qian said with an ugly expression, I know that everyone has their own difficulties, but didn't the Duke of Loyalty say that people need to be human? Money can be earned again. The soldiers' clothes can be mended and used again. But those Han people who came from afar don't have a second set of clothes. They don't even have a change of clothes. In such an environment and conditions, it's too difficult to expect them to have a sense of belonging. It's not easy for us to do our job. Since Yu Qian spoke of his own difficulties, the others naturally did not say anything. Although they did not say anything, their attitude was firm. It was not so easy to change. The atmosphere seemed to be in a stalemate, causing everyone's expressions. But at this moment, a loud voice sounded, Lord Yu is right. Everything must be based on the people. I think the garment factory still needs more support. Who? When they heard someone commenting on the work of the garment factory, and from the tone, it seemed to be Yu Qian, the directors of the branch factories became a little unhappy. In particular, Fang Lei, the head of the military uniform factory, turned around and looked fiercely in the direction of the voice. The few of them looked in the direction where the voice came from. What they had in common was that when they saw the person who spoke, everyone was stunned on the spot. After that, Fang Lei, who was from the military, reacted the fastest. He strode forward with a face full of excitement. Sixth young master, you've come. Hee, factory director Fang Lei, how is it? Are you used to working here as a military person? Yang Qindong laughed and called out the other party's name. The person who came was Yang Qindong. Ever since he released the qi in his body, his senses had become exceptionally sharp. Just now, he was accompanied by Leng Song, Gao Xiong, and the others as they walked over. While they were still far away, he heard the conversation between Yu Qian and the others. Fang Lei, who was called out, was very excited. He did not expect that after more than 3 years, Yang Qindong could still recognize him at a glance. This excitement made his eyes brim with tears. Sixth young master, I'm still used to it. Get used to it. Yang Qindong walked to Fang Lei's side and took the initiative to shake hands with him. Then, he patted Fang Lei's shoulder and said, everything is work. As long as you put your heart into it, you will still contribute. When the time comes, the people will not forget you. Yes. After receiving Yang Qindong's encouragement, Fang Lei's tears flowed uncontrollably. He originally thought that because of his body's condition, the sixth young master would forget about him after he left the army. Now, it seemed that he had thought too much. After shaking hands with Fang Lei, Yang Qindong hurriedly took a few steps forward. He took the initiative to greet the other factory directors and shook hands with them one by one. When he shook hands with Zhou Hua, he took the initiative to call out, Aunt Zhou. As soon as Lin Mengya called her auntie, Zhou Hua's smile immediately spread across her face, as if she had drunk honey. This scene was seen by Wan Xiaoyu, who was among the crowd behind them. Her face immediately flushed red and she was very happy. This was the face that the sixth young master gave her. Thinking about it, in Crimson City, how many people could claim to be his senior? After shaking hands with everyone and thanking them for their hard work, Yang Qindong finally came in front of Yu Qian. Then, he said with a smile on his face, Sir you've worked hard during this period. You've worked hard too. With a straight face, Yu Qian was a little uncomfortable. Thinking back to when he was in Baiming, Yu Qian still had a lot of opinions about Yang Qindong. He thought that this young man was a little too arrogant and always looked down on others. He preferred to be unconventional and such people had to be dealt with properly. Therefore, he was willing to do anything that could make Yang Qindong uncomfortable. But who would have thought that he would actually become someone else's subordinate? This was really fate making a fool out of him. Yu Qian's awkwardness was within Yang Qindong's expectations. However, Yu Qian was a capable person and he respected capable people very much. Therefore, he would not talk about the past in front of everyone, let alone make things difficult for Yu Qian. On the contrary, After greeting the few people, he stood firmly on Yu Qian's side and gave a speech. Factory directors, Sir Yu's words are very reasonable. I once said that technology is the #1 productivity, but at the same time, we have to put people first. This time, we spent a lot of money to liberate more than 4 million Han civilians from the southern Ming dynasty. They are our brothers. As a family, how can we watch our brothers have no clothes to wear? I don't think that's possible. Therefore, I personally suggest that the underwear factory and military uniform factory cooperate with the garment factory and solve the problem of the civilians wearing clothes first. As for making money, it can be done at any time. Take care of the uniforms carefully and sew them up. I'm sure the cute soldiers below won't have any objections, right? When he said the last sentence, Yang Qindong had already turned around and looked at Leng Song and Gao Xiong behind him. Yes, sixth young master is right. Our army and the civilians are one family. It's only right that we help each other. Leng Song and Gao Xiong looked at Yang Qindong's gaze and knew what to say. Although this was Yang Qindong's personal suggestion, the entire Crimson City was created by him. What difference was there between his words and the emperor's decree? As for whether Mei Ling and Fang Lei would have any opinions. Not to mention that they had no way of refuting Yang Qindong's decision, he could decide their future with just a few words. Who would joke about this matter? What, if you don't want to work anymore, then leave. A three-legged toad is hard to find, but aren't there plenty of two-legged talents? Yes, we will immediately follow the sixth young master's instructions. Zhou Hua immediately expressed her stance. This time, no one dared to object. The matter was resolved. Seeing that Yang Qindong didn't have any other instructions, Zhou Hua told the factory directors to do what they were supposed to do. Originally, he wanted to let Yang Qindong say a few words, but considering that he had just returned to Crimson City and didn't know much about the various matters, he was afraid that what he said at this time would be biased, so he decided to find another opportunity. After leaving the garment factory, the person beside Yang Qindong changed to Yu Qian. Compared to the awkwardness when the two met, when they talked about work, Yu Qian's expression slowly returned to normal. Yang Qindong also had a rough understanding of the current Crimson City from Yu Qian. After the destruction of Jiaoji, about 500,000 people migrated from there. In addition to the 4,500,000 from southern Ming, the population increased by about 5 million. For the Yang Xie government, which only had a population of 1 million, the pressure was obvious. In Yu Qian's words, whether it was Crimson City or even the entire Ryukyu Island, there was a limit to the number of people it could support. Even if they took down the first Shang dynasty and completely liberated this place, the population shouldn't be too high. Otherwise, the pressure would be too great. Yang Qindong had a better understanding of Ryukyu Island than anyone else. It was only 6 million people. Even if the remaining 1 million people from the first Shang dynasty were included, it was only 7 million people. For Ryukyu Island, which had a surface area of 36,008 square kilometers, it wasn't much of a pressure. From what he knew, the population of Ryukyu Island in the past had reached 20 million people. Other than the lack of housing, didn't the people there live quite well? However, since this question was raised by Yu Qian, Yang Qindong naturally couldn't deny it. Instead, he nodded and said, "All right, I understand. However, Lord Yu, don't worry. Now that we have conquered Jiaoji, it will become our second base. After that, we will conquer the Lansang Kingdom and the other small countries nearby. When that time comes, the pressure on the population will shift." Chapter 549. Listening to Yang Qindong talk about these things so casually, Yu Qian was very shocked. At this time, he really wanted to ask what Yang Qindong's goal was. If one day he really cleaned up the small countries nearby, what attitude would he use to face the great Ming dynasty? Could it be that he wanted to overthrow them? However, this kind of question was just a thought in his heart. Although he was now in charge of Crimson City, he still knew what to ask and what not to ask. The most important thing was that Yu Qian was also a nationalist in his bones. He also believed in the phrase, "Those who are not of my race must have a different heart," so he was supportive of Yang Qindong's actions. Yang Qindong had returned to Crimson City, but under his intentional suppression, this news did not spread too widely. Although some people knew that the godlike young master had returned to the island, there were too few people who had seen him. Adding on the fact that everyone had a lot of work to do, there were many things that they had to do, so not many people paid attention to this matter. This was the result that Yang Qindong wanted to see. After all, there were suddenly so many people on the island. He wouldn't believe that there weren't spies from the Great Ming Dynasty and other forces. Although the military had already controlled the way out of the island, it was better to be low-key just in case. If he was low-key, no one would pay attention to him. Even if some spies really escaped, they wouldn't be able to get conclusive evidence that he was the leader of the mercenaries. It was no wonder that Yang Qindong was so careful. The Great Ming Dynasty was still very powerful. Especially when there was new news that Baiming had developed some new cannons. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the new cannons would be equipped in the army. After the Southern Ming Dynasty received so much help, the promotion of firearms would also be put on the agenda. With Baiming and the Southern Ming Dynasty being in each other's shoes, the Southern Ming Dynasty would probably steal the new cannons that Baiming developed. They would also be equipped with new cannons. Perhaps this was the change that Yang Qindong's arrival brought to them. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. In short, his opponent's strength had become stronger, so he had to be careful. Before he had a strong enough army, he still had to be cautious when dealing with the Great Ming Dynasty. Although he didn't want to meet with ordinary people, he still wanted to meet with some of the higher-ups and factory directors. Firstly, it was to encourage them and show that he valued them. Secondly, if there were any problems, he would be able to help them solve one or two. Just like that night when he arrived at Crimson City, Yang Qindong first met with Wan Qi, the director of the power plant, in the palace that had been built long ago. Electricity, as an advanced technology, had already been used in some practical work in Crimson City. For example, the machinery of the textile factory, the simple mixer and production of the cement factory, the craft of the glass factory, the machinery of the paper mill and the brewery, the craftsmen and blacksmiths working with iron and steel, and so on. There were also things like the arts troupe, the publicity department's performance, as well as things like civilian electricity. Electricity was very complicated. If there was only one idea, it would be very difficult to turn it into reality. However, once it was really done, it would be much simpler. After the cultivation and use of rubber on a large scale, it would be even simpler to use. Yang Qindong called Wan Qi over mainly to talk to him about the use and situation of electricity. Wan Qi might be very impressive in front of outsiders, and even many departments that used electricity needed to have a good relationship with him to do things. However, in front of Yang Qindong, he had always been very humble. He wouldn't forget that electricity came from the sixth young master's ideas, and even a lot of his knowledge was learned from the books that the sixth young master gave him. It could be said that in front of the sixth young master, he was just a primary school student. Because he was really humble, when facing Yang Qindong, Wan Qi gave a detailed report of everything he knew. For example, the current needs of electricity, as well as some projects that were being developed. For example, tap water would not work if there was a lack of electricity. There was no way to filter and drink it. When some machines used electricity, the voltage was unstable, and they were constantly overcoming difficulties. Yang Qindong listened very carefully. Often when he encountered a problem, he would tell Wan Qi some of the situations that he saw in the future. However, he was not a professional after all, so he could only point out a direction. He would go back to the warehouse to see if there were any relevant books. Throughout the night, the two of them chatted a lot. In the end, Yang Qindong took out some drawings. There were pictures of rice cookers, induction cookers, and simple electric kettles. These were all related to people's livelihood. Speaking of which, it was not very complicated after electricity was connected. In fact, the sixth young master wanted to simplify things first. Once Yuan Qi and the others could really use it skillfully, then they could consider making electric scooters. After sending Yuan Qi away, Yang Qindong met with the student Feng Ku, who had been waiting outside for a long time. Feng Ku was in the first batch of students at the Yang Family Academy. He was originally a student in dire straits, but he was very smart and his ideas were also very imaginative. In Yang Qindong's opinion, he had the potential to be a scientist and creator. This time, he called Feng Ku over to let him make a bicycle. Since they were going to use electric scooters, of course, the bicycle had to be made first. In contrast, the bicycle did not require too much knowledge. It only needed a blueprint. Then, the craftsmen and blacksmiths just needed to make the relevant parts. With rubber tires, it could be said that everything was ready. Feng Ku left with the bicycle blueprint with joy and excitement. He believed that tonight would be a sleepless night for him. Are you still not going to rest? After drinking a few pots of tea, Hu Yan, as the first madam, appeared in the side hall of the palace. Stretching his body, Yang Qindong smilingly patted his right leg. He knew that he was too eager to achieve success, which resulted in him neglecting the few ladies. It was truly a sin. Although they were already an old couple, Hu Yan still sat down on Yang Qindong's lap with a blushing face. Then, with a hug, her body was suspended in the air. Then came the sound of Yang Qindong's laughter. In his arms, Hu Yan buried her head very deeply. Such a shy appearance made Yang Qindong unable to stop himself from having a primitive impulse. Let's go. It's late, it's time to rest, ha ha ha. Yang Qindong's laughter resounded in the palace. Then, with Hu Yan in his arms, he strode toward the bedroom at the back of the palace. The moon hid in the clouds shyly. That night, Yang Qindong showed his power. The qi in his body became very active. Not only did he subdue Hu Yan, but he also hugged the other two madams, Lady Xue and Su Munair. Even so, it still did not satisfy him. If he did not consider that they were his wives and did not want to ravage them too much, he was afraid that after this night, the three of them would not be able to get out of bed for 3 days. After a night of absurdity, they had unlocked too many embarrassing positions. The three women accompanied Yang Qindong until dawn. After that, they fell into a deep sleep. On the contrary, Yang Qindong became even more spirited. He felt that with the help of qi, his whole body was refreshed. At this moment, it was as if his strength had obtained another breakthrough. After sleeping with the three women, he walked out of the bedroom and came to an empty martial arts field. He started to practice martial arts. Indeed, it gave people the feeling that he was a juggler. If there were people from later generations here, they would definitely watch all of this as if they were watching a martial arts movie. The only difference was that Yang Qindong did not install any auxiliary items such as wires on his body. In other words, Yang Qindong's leap was more than 10 feet high. It was completely done with his own strength. 10 feet was 3 meters. More than 10 feet could reach a height of 4 meters. However, Yang Qindong could jump straight to such a height after forcefully pulling out the scallion from the dry land. If he was given a chance to run, he would probably jump half a meter higher. This could be described as Qing Gong. In fact, even Qing Gong was not as powerful as this. After all, there was a limit to the jumping speed of the human body. It was already good for an average person to jump about half a meter. It was already shocking for those professional basketball players to jump more than a meter. However, these were nothing in front of Yang Qindong at this moment. Feeling that his body was as light as a swallow, and the existence of the qi seemed to allow him to perform all kinds of dangerous actions that existed in his imagination at will. After there was absolutely no difficulty, Yang Qindong tried his best to break through. Waves of turbid qi were spat out, and his body became more vigorous. Fortunately, this place was very close to the bedroom in the back hall of the palace. Usually, no one would appear here. Even the soldiers of the first and second guard teams could not appear here without orders. After all, everyone wanted privacy. No man would want his wife to be stared at by other men every day, right? It was precisely because of this that Yang Qindong's performance today was not discovered by anyone. Otherwise, who knew how big of a commotion it would cause? A full half an hour, which was equivalent to an hour now. After an hour of high-difficulty training, Yang Qindong finally stopped the movements of his hands with a satisfied face. After the extremely active qi in his body, he sat cross-legged on the ground and began to absorb the essence in the air. The season of the year was in spring, and the time of the day was in the morning. The air in the morning was often extraordinarily fresh. In this fresh air, there seemed to be some qi of heaven and earth mixed in. These were all unceremoniously absorbed by Yang Qindong into his body, and finally turned into a cloud of white mist that appeared above the head of the sixth young master. This scene looked very unrealistic. In this regard, Yang Qindong did not have the slightest idea. It was not until another 2 hours had passed that he felt that his body could not absorb too much air that he slowly opened his eyes and stood up slowly. Chapter 550. At this moment, he felt that the bones in his body seemed to have become lighter. On the contrary, the strength of each punch was more than 10% stronger than before. Could it be that it can improve my body's quality and strength? I should try it more often in the future. A rare look of curiosity or even lust appeared on his face. Yang Qindong hummed a tune that no one else could understand as he left the place. After a morning of training, he was too hungry. He urgently needed food to replenish his energy. After a night of tiring, Yang Qindong didn't show any signs of fatigue. Instead, he was full of energy. After eating 3 people's worth of breakfast, he left with the first and second guard squad. After coming to Resin City, there were too many things that required his attention. There were also too many industries that required his guidance. For example, the weapon factory and shipyard, these kinds of industries that were obviously very high-tech. Since the invention of electricity, there was a big breakthrough in this kind of research. The production of some items could even be considered as an assembly line operation. Or it could be said that the conditions were ripe. The next step was to build lathes. On this point, Yang Qindong didn't dabble much in it in his previous life. The only thing he could do was to describe some scenes that he saw in his previous life. Then, he took out some related books for them to study. Even so, it brought a great shock to these professional researchers. They all looked at Yang Qindong with admiration and even worship. In their eyes, their sixth young master seemed to be omnipotent. The inspection and guidance took a total of 7 days. On the morning of the 8th day, after sleeping with 4 people as usual, he finished his training in the morning. After eating breakfast, he directly brought the guards to the military building in Resin City. This building that was painted green on the outside was the military headquarters of the Yang faction's new army. It was where the head of the military was located. For example, Ling Song and Gao Xiong, the 2 division commanders, had their own offices here. This morning, it could be said that the military officers were gathered here. A group of military officers with the ranks of senior colonel, colonel, lieutenant colonel, and major were standing in the plaza in front of the building. They attracted the attention of many people in the building. This was the first time something like this had happened. Although there were already quite a number of officers in the building, most of the time, everyone was busy with their own matters. How could it be as complete and lively as this time? To be able to make so many officers appear here and wait peacefully, other than Yang Qindong, who was known as the god of war in the military, no one else would be able to do this. They're here. Men. A lieutenant colonel hurriedly ran back to the courtyard. When he returned to his team, he brought the news that Yang Qindong had arrived. Not long after, Yang Qindong, who was dressed in a marshal's uniform, arrived in front of the military headquarters under the escort of dozens of guards. Salute! Ling Song took the lead and gave the command. Immediately, the 20-something officers raised their right arms and gave a standard military salute. Yang Qindong stopped in his tracks and returned a solemn and serious military salute. After that, he laughed and went forward to shake the hands of the high-ranking officers, trying to get closer to each other. Those who were here today were all elites of Lingfeng. They were all at least battalion-level officers. On the army side, there was the division commander of the 1st Regiment, Ling Song, the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Mo Qingyu, the chief of staff of the 1st Regiment, Ting Shan, the 2nd Battalion commander, Ling Dechang, the 3rd Battalion commander, Xiao Yining, the 2nd Regiment commander, Luo Pe, the 2nd Regiment commander, Kong Jia, the 2nd Regiment commander, Kong Chuanxin, the 3rd Battalion commander, Tian Su, the 3rd Regiment commander, Wu Sheng, the political commissar, Chen Bo, and the 3rd Battalion commander, Chang Yang. On the Navy side, there was the division commander of the 1st Regiment, Gao Xiong, the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Ji Fei, the chief of staff of the 1st Regiment, Yu Guang, the 2nd Battalion commander, Ding Yan, the 3rd Battalion commander, Xiao Changwang, the 2nd Regiment commander, Nie Tong, the 2nd Regiment commander, Long Yin Tian, the 2nd Battalion commander, He Gong, and the 3rd Battalion commander, Gu Yang. It was no exaggeration to say that these people were the ones who formed the upper echelon of Lingfeng. Of course, there were a few officers who were not present. For example, Battalion Commander Xiao Feng, who had been in charge of Baiming's capital, but they were still in the minority. Yang Qindong, who had shaken hands with all the division, regiment, and battalion officers, was led into the headquarters by Ling Song and Gao Xiong. In the spacious conference room, Yang Qindong listened to the officers' reports on their work and gave some encouraging instructions. Then, everyone came to the sand table, where the division commander of the army, Ling Song, personally introduced the current situation of the First Shang dynasty to Yang Qindong and everyone else. Yes, the most important reason for his visit today, other than to see everyone and express the importance he attached to them, was to discuss the plan to destroy the First Shang dynasty. More than 3 years ago, from the moment he set his sights on Ryukyu Island, this plan had been in progress. Furthermore, with consecutive victories, the First Shang dynasty, which seemed to be flourishing, was suppressed to the New North region. After Tainan and Taichung were occupied, the First Shang dynasty had been struggling at death's door. It was like a terminally ill old man, who knew if he would be able to open his eyes again the next day after he fell asleep. Would the country still exist the next day? If not for the fact that they had to take into consideration their digestive ability, the First Shang dynasty would have long ceased to exist. In the process of exterminating Jiaoji, the Yang faction had developed greatly. This was especially so when they made use of the Southern Ming Empire's money to trade for 4.5 million Han citizens. The Yang faction finally had the ability to swallow up the number 1 Shang dynasty. Today's meeting was to formulate a military plan to exterminate another country. At the beginning of the meeting, Ling Song introduced the situation. He held a command stick in his hand and introduced the situation to everyone with a serious face. The New North region is the most prosperous region in the First Shang dynasty. In comparison, the economic conditions there are much better than Tainan and Taichung that we have occupied. This can be seen from the fact that no one has crossed the border recently. As a country that has only been established for less than 50 years, they are still full of vitality. Especially the 7th king, Shangde. Although he is still very young, he is indeed very capable. In the past 3 years, the spies that we have sent out have reported that they are actively working on military defense and training their soldiers. Especially their navy, they are equipped with self-made cannons. Although their range and functionality cannot be compared to our navy, they are still considered to be of a certain scale. If it were other opponents, they would be able to put up a fight. Through Ling Song's introduction, Yang Qindong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The butterfly effect that his appearance had brought about was indeed powerful. Even the remote First Shang dynasty had developed their own cannons. Although it could be seen from Ling Song's words that he didn't think highly of them, they were still cannons. It seemed like his development speed still needed to be increased. Otherwise, Although he couldn't be surpassed by others in a short period of time, when his opponents became stronger, the pressure on him to conquer the world would also increase. Everyone, our spies have reported that the enemy's army is stationed at Hsinchu and Ilan. There are 50,000 soldiers in each of these two places. Moreover, there are trenches all over the place. Several lines of defense have formed a deep defensive net, causing a certain degree of difficulty for our army to charge head-on. As for the navy, more than 600 warships have gathered at Keelung port. Although there aren't many of them of a large scale, at least 30 of them are equipped with cannons. The effective killing range is about 1 li. When they heard that the effective killing range was only 1 li, the officers below laughed out loud. Especially the navy officers, the lowest firing range of the cannons they were equipped with was 3,000 meters. Naturally, 500 meters was nothing in their eyes. Many people were laughing, but only Yang Qindong couldn't help but frown when he heard this. He knew that the repeated victories had brought pride to these officers. Some people said that the victory of a war didn't depend on the number of people on both sides. This was because there were countless people who had proven that one side could win with fewer people. There were also people who said that the victory of a war didn't depend on whether the weapons were advanced or not. This was also fully reflected in the war against the United States. Even though the number of cannons the enemy used was almost the same as the number of soldiers they sent out, in the end, they still didn't obtain victory and didn't advance a single step. There were also people who said that the victory of a war couldn't be determined only by the results of the war. After all, horses could stumble. Even an adult man could be trapped by a child's trap if he wasn't paying attention. But now, these signs had appeared. At this moment, Yang Qindong couldn't help but say something. Just as many officers were smiling and had an indifferent expression, he suddenly opened his mouth. What? Are you guys very proud? That's, Out of instinct, one of the officers casually answered this sentence. But after realizing that it was the sixth young master who asked this question, the officer immediately stood on the spot with an awkward expression. The other officers who were still laughing and chatting also put away their smiles at this moment and put on a stern face. If the question just now was asked by Leng Song or any of Gao Xiong's teachers, they wouldn't feel any pressure. After all, the people who were here were all capable of fighting. They were all individuals with good personal qualities. They had even been through the tempering of war and were used to life and death. It was very difficult for these people to convince others. Even if your current position was higher than theirs, it didn't mean that your position would be higher than theirs in the future. Even if Leng Song, Gao Xiong, and the others obtained high positions, in the eyes of these officers, it was because they followed the sixth young master the earliest and had the opportunity to stand out. That was why they had their current achievements. On the contrary, if this opportunity was given to them, they could also perform as well or even better. This was the reason why some people were arrogant. The more arrogant and capable a person was, the more they naturally wouldn't submit to others. Even if that person was their superior, it was the same because the sixth young master had said more than once that those who were capable would rise and those who were mediocre would fall. There was no need to look at seniority. Chapter 551. Who knew if they would seize the opportunity to soar into the sky? But when these words were asked by Yang Qindong, everything was a different story. Who was Yang Qindong? He was the sixth young master who must be respected in the eyes of the higher-ups. He was the god of war in the eyes of the soldiers. He was the eastern commander in the eyes of the young girls. He was the god in the eyes of the common people. He was the Duke of Loyalty in the Great Ming Dynasty. He was the founder of Yang Xia, the creator of the mercenary army, and everyone's Bo Lu. It was not an exaggeration to say that if Yang Qindong hated someone, then no matter how great that person's achievements were, he would immediately lose everything. Don't think that it was impossible. This was the consensus formed in the feudal society. Here, no one would talk about human rights with you. Otherwise, when an emperor dealt with his subjects, he would have to discuss with the other ministers, look at everyone's faces, and even hold an open election. From this point alone, Yang Qindong was the king of Qiqian city, and the only king. If he was unhappy, then no one would have a good time. Obviously, the current Yang Qindong was indeed a little angry. After everyone realized this, they immediately became nervous and careful. Yang Qindong saw the change in their attitude, but he was not satisfied. Who knew how many of these people really knew that they were wrong, and not just putting on an act? Therefore, he needed to point out everyone's problems. Although this would make some people unhappy for a while, it didn't matter as long as it was sincerely for them. Do you think you are very powerful? Or do you think that you are already invincible in the world, and you don't put others in your eyes? Yang Qindong asked in a deep voice when everyone was quiet. When Yang Qindong was angry, Tiger, Mane and Beta Persei immediately puffed out their chests. Then, under their silence, the members of the first security team who were in charge of security around the conference room began to rub their hands together, as if they were waiting for the sixth young master's order to arrest them. The change in the atmosphere in the conference room made some of the officers who just wanted to put on a show feel nervous at this moment. When they noticed that the sixth young master was not joking with them, and was about to get serious in a fit of anger, many people began to reflect. Could it be that they were really too arrogant? Just as these people woke up, Yang Qindong's voice came out of the conference room again. Pat your chests. You were able to obtain today's victory was not because the firearms in your hands were too advanced. Before the enemy could reach you, they were already killed by you. If you didn't have advanced firearms, how could you defeat the enemy? Do you know that in a cold weapon battle, even if we had the help of firearms, we still suffered hundreds of casualties in the battle with the Miao army? You boast about your strong combat power, but this is actually just a joke. It's all because our soldiers are well trained, the firearms in the army's hands are powerful, and we made a serious plan before the war. Do you really think it's your credit? If it is, which one of you will bring a big sword and a spear to me and win a battle with a small army? That will make me admire him. Which one of you can guarantee that you can do it? One question after another came out of Yang Qindong's mouth, making the officers speechless. Yes, thinking about it carefully, wasn't the reason why they were able to win so many battles because the quality of the soldiers was relatively close, they obeyed discipline and listened to orders, they planned carefully before the war, the source of information was timely and accurate, and they also had the most advanced firearms in their hands? Although these victories were attributed to them, in fact, what difference would it make if someone else was in command? Maybe they didn't do as well as they did, but there was another possibility. Maybe they did better than them. Thinking of this, the pride on their faces disappeared and was replaced by deep self-blame. They now knew that in a real war, they didn't play a big role. At least, it was much smaller than they thought. Their pride was gone, and their self-blame increased. Yang Qindong noticed the change in the atmosphere and his expression became better. As the saying goes, one cannot achieve anything without polishing. They had only just wiped out Jiaoji and occupied half of the Shang dynasty. Yet, some of them were already excited. If they didn't stop the wind from blowing, who would be able to control these people in the future? Sixth young master, it's our fault. We political cadres didn't do our part. Seeing Yang Qindong get angry and even reprimand them, someone had to take responsibility. The political commissar of the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division, Mo Qingyu, took the initiative to stand up and take responsibility. Following Mo Qingyu's action, the other political commissars also stood up, such as Kong Jia, Chen Bo, Ji Fei, and the others. Some of them had just become political commissars, like Chen Bo. Logically speaking, such a thing had nothing to do with them. However, Yang Qindong knew that this was only on the surface because they never thought of themselves as political cadres. Using Chen Bo as an example, he still thought of himself as the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment. In his eyes, the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment was just a part-time job. It only meant that he had been promoted. If that was all, it would not be enough. They would have let down Yang Qindong's expectations of them. The reason why the People's Liberation Army was able to win despite being outnumbered and ultimately achieve victory was because of the political cadre's hard work. Command of the party was not just for show. It was because of this that there was no mutiny among the soldiers. Yang Qindong did not think of using this method because he did not want to establish a party right now. This was not because it did not fit the current situation, but because he did not have the ability to do so. There were some things that if you did not have the ability to do it, it would be easy to draw a tiger but end up like a dog. Therefore, he felt that it was necessary to establish a new department. He could use today's opportunity to establish this department. His gaze first fell on Mo Qingyu and the other political workers. Then he nodded and said, "You all have responsibilities. I have taught you before to grasp the hearts of the people and to establish ideological work. This is to increase the fighting power of the army. These two things complement each other, just like how a person needs two legs to walk. However, it is clear that you did not listen to these words. Therefore, to show that you are not responsible for your work, each of you will be given a demerit. Do you have any objections?" There were rewards in the army, so naturally, there were punishments. When it came to punishments, there were demerits and major demerits. These demerits were not to be underestimated. They were not only written, but also recorded in one's personal file. Moreover, each person could only have 5 demerits and 3 major demerits. If they exceeded these limits, then sorry, they would either be demoted or have to leave the army. Therefore, being given a demerit was something that many officers were afraid of. After all, for many people, their days in the army were still long. No one could guarantee that they would not make any mistakes. However, once they accumulated to a certain extent, who knew how many demerits would be given? Now that Yang Qindong had opened his mouth and said that Mo Qingyu and the others had passed, their faces became ugly. However, this was given to them by Yang Qindong, so they could not refuse. At this moment, they could only pinch their noses and accept it. Among them, Chen Bo was even more unconvinced after accepting it. He had just been promoted to political commissar, and he had not done anything yet. Although he understood this kind of work, being given a demerit as a new officer was not something that anyone was willing to accept. Fortunately, after Yang Qindong gave them a stick, he gave them a sweet date. In order to show the importance and necessity of political work, I have decided to establish a new department. It will be called the Political Department. Its rank will be the same as the military. I will be the head of the Political Department. The first batch of committee members will be Mo Qingyu, Kang Jia, Chen Bo, and Ji Fei. In the future, when it comes to the evaluation and promotion of officers, not only will the military have to give their opinions, but the political department will also have to give their opinions. Only those who pass both examinations can be promoted to military officer. Otherwise, they won't be able to pass. Does anyone have any opinions? Suddenly establishing a political department and promoting it to the same rank as the military was something that many people did not expect. This was like putting another layer of shackles on the heads of all officers. In the future, not only would they have to listen to the military, but the political department would also become like a new father. It would be impossible to say that no one had any opinions. However, in front of Yang Qindong, especially when everyone was so proud of themselves, who would dare to take the lead? Mo Qingyu and the others, who were not responsible for anything, were given a demerit. What did they say? Therefore, when Yang Qindong asked for everyone's opinion, no one stood up to oppose. On the contrary, the 2 big shots in the military, Ling Song and Gao Xiong, spoke out in support. We support the 6th Young Master's establishment of the political department. Ling Song and Gao Xiong spoke out in support. They had no choice but to do so. Otherwise, it would give others the impression that they wanted to monopolize everything. Why? Was the military so powerful? Couldn't there be any restrictions on their existence? More importantly, were they not going to listen to the 6th Young Master's words? Ling Song and Gao Xiong, who were already vice ministers of the military, would not allow others to hold them back. They immediately spoke out in support. Since the two division commanders had the same attitude, the other officers naturally raised their hands in support. Although some of these people might have different opinions, it did not matter. The minority obeys the majority. Chapter 552. Furthermore, if there was something that could only be done after everyone agreed to it, then there would be nothing left in the world that could be done. Some people had opinions but didn't dare to voice them out. However, some people didn't have any opinions at all. For example, the committee members of the political department. They had just been marked down and were feeling indignant. Now that they had a new position and could even decide on an important part of the military officer evaluation, it meant that they had more power in their hands. This would make their work much easier in the future. After all, this was related to their personal benefits, who would dare to not take it seriously. Among these people, Chen Bo was the happiest. He was already a regimental officer. He had just become a committee member of the military headquarters. Now, he was also a committee member of the political department. He was the only one who was a committee member of both. How could he not be happy about it? As for when he could only be a committee member of one department, he would have to make a choice. However, it didn't matter. He was already the first committee member of two departments, wasn't he? This was enough. This would become the capital that he could show off to others in his life. He didn't care about what others thought. After Yang Qindong announced the establishment of the political department, he took over the baton from Leng Song. Then, he came to the sand table and began to explain the battle plan. After Yang Qindong explained the battle plan that he had in mind, he also emphasized on the enemy's cannons. Those are cannons that can hit a mile away. Although they can't be compared to the cannons in our hands. However, if we don't get rid of them, once the soldiers charge, they will be facing death. Although there are always casualties in war, I still hope that everyone can take the lives of the soldiers seriously. In the future, military achievements will not only depend on how many people you kill, but also how many people you lose. This will be done by the political department. Great, this increased the work of the political department and also increased their power. However, this was for the sake of the soldiers' lives. No one could raise any objections. For a moment, the officers could only nod and agree. The final decision of the meeting was to launch the war horn 3 days later. They would use 10 days to eliminate the first Shang dynasty and let Ryukyu Island become Yang Xie's first base. In comparison, 3 days to prepare was already a lot of time. After all, the first Shang dynasty wasn't far away from the first Shang dynasty. Leng Feng was the main force of the soldiers participating in the battle, with the auxiliary soldiers as support. If it wasn't for the fact that the Navy needed more time to prepare, the mobilization order would have been issued today and the army could have set off the day after tomorrow. After arranging the work, Yang Qindong turned around and left the building under the protection of the guards. Leng Song and Gao Xiong, who originally wanted to ask the 6th young master to stay for dinner, didn't have the chance to speak. Division Commander Leng, could it be that 6th young master is angry at us? Standing at the gate of the military headquarters, after watching Yang Qindong leave, the Marine Division Commander Gao Xiong couldn't help but ask. Can't you tell? I say, Commander Gao, your Navy officers are a little too arrogant. You should reorganize them. Leng Song turned his head and said with some annoyance. Due to the fact that the Navy had advanced ships and cannons, they had been unrivaled on the sea since the beginning. After a long time, they naturally became arrogant and complacent. Being criticized in public, Gao Xiong's face didn't look too good. However, he wasn't someone to be trifled with. He immediately retorted, I admit that some of the Navy officers are a little arrogant. But is your army any better? Since when did you look down on others just because you have guns? Commander Gao, please don't worry about this. I will naturally take care of the army's matters. Even if we don't care, the political department will. You're on your own now. Leng Song turned around and left after saying this. It was obvious that he was a little angry. As someone who was chosen by Yang Qindong, Ling Song's achievements today were already beyond his expectations. After his desires were satisfied, he was worried about losing everything he had, so he would often consider many things when he did things. Things like being cocky would never happen to him. However, if he didn't do this, the officers under him would get carried away. This time, they were implicated by these people. In the past, when he saw this kind of thing happen, he always thought that these officers' fighting ability was very strong, so he turned a blind eye to it. But now that the sixth young master was angry, if he didn't do something, once the political department stepped in, it would be really embarrassing. So now he had to do something. Commander Gao Xiong also had the same idea as Ling Song. No one knew better than him what kind of soldiers he led. Yang Qindong's suggestion was also very correct. But in order not to disappoint his brothers, Gao Xiong didn't say anything. Gao Xiong was originally a pirate. Even if he was in his current position, he still had a bandit nature in his heart. This was also why Yang Qindong didn't say anything to them and directly announced the establishment of the political department. He believed that after today's matter, these two commanders should know what to do. Of course, if they still didn't know what to do, then Yang Qindong didn't mind moving them to another position. This was not to get rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. On the contrary, it was to protect them. Otherwise, in the long run, they would continue to walk on the wrong path. Until one day, even if he wanted to pull these two people back, he was afraid that he would be powerless to do so. Yang Qindong returned to the palace under the protection of a group of guards. Seeing that the guards had gone to their posts, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were following behind him, approached and asked, "Sixth young master, do you need to arrange for people to keep an eye on those officers?" The deputy director of the security bureau, Yang San, did not follow them to Resin City. Instead, he went to the Great Ming Dynasty to check on the work. After all, he had been away for a while, and he needed to have first-hand information for some intelligence work. This was conducive to Yang Qindong's next decision. In Yang San's absence, Tiger's Mane, as the director, took on the responsibility. He asked this because Yang Qindong's decision in the military conference room was too sudden. He was afraid that some of the officers would take things too hard and cause problems. Keep an eye on them. Keep an eye on who? Yang Qindong turned his head and asked as if he didn't understand. Of course it's to keep an eye on those officers in the meeting. Tiger's Mane had an expression that said it should be so. There's no need. Who knew? Yang Qindong decisively refused. They are the backbone of the army, and their loyalty is reliable. As for the fact that they can't think straight for a while, it's understandable. When faced with new things, do you always give people time to adapt? How about this, go and inform Ling Song and Gao Xiong to invite them to the palace for dinner tonight. Yang Qindong didn't want to suspect any of his subordinates. Unless it was necessary, he disdained to keep an eye on them. Don't suspect those you use, don't use those you suspect. He also believed that under the big picture, unless they really couldn't achieve anything, no one would have any other ideas. Of course, if someone really did that, Yang Qindong would naturally kill them mercilessly. If they were brothers, he would naturally share their blessings. But if they were enemies, then blood would definitely be spilled. Tiger's Mane sent the message. Yang Qindong turned around and walked towards the depths of the palace. In the large square of the palace, waves of pleasant laughter could be heard. Sister Shui, don't panic. Keep your breathing steady. Just hold on and use your legs to push forward. This voice belonged to the fifth madam, Su Man. Originally, she wanted to kill Yang Qindong, but in the end, she was influenced by him. After a beauty loves a hero, she came to Crimson City. Here, her vision and thoughts were greatly impacted, and she quickly fell in love with this place. Especially when Yang Qindong deliberately pretended to be poisoned for her, Nan Ming didn't have the slightest intention of clearing her grandfather's name. This made Su Man completely disappointed in Nan Ming. She turned around and placed her heart on Yang Qindong. Her heart was liberated, and she became cheerful. At this moment, the laughter was so pleasant and pleasant. Yang Qindong made a shushing gesture to Beta Persei behind him. Then, he moved lightly to the side of the square and saw the third Madame, Xiao Yushua, Madame Shui, nervously riding on the bicycle. Speaking of the bicycle, Yang Qindong called Feng Ku, who had the potential to be a scientist. After passing the blueprint to him, he didn't disappoint. In just a few days, the first bicycle was born. This morning, it was sent to the palace. Yang Qindong happened to be absent, so it was given to the three madams. The first madam, Hu Yan, rode it for a while. She was a little scared after falling down, so Madame Shui began to try it. Watching the fun was not afraid of making things worse. Most of the time, there were some things that people thought were very simple when they saw others doing it. Just like Su Munair now. Because she had never ridden before, but with Hu Yan's experience, she knew the principle behind it. She immediately began to comment on Madame Shui who was riding the bike. Her voice wasn't soft. Madame Shui was still trying. Although she fell down at first, she had experienced too many hardships due to her background, so she didn't take the fall seriously at all. Instead, she continued to try. Except for the two maids supporting and protecting her, she rode very seriously and put a lot of strength on her legs. You shouldn't use so much strength. Seeing that Madame Shui was treating the bicycle like an enemy and was about to crush it, Yang Qindong finally couldn't help but come out from the dark and began to guide her. Yang Qindong's sudden appearance startled Madame Shui, and she lost her balance on the bicycle and fell to the grass beside her. This scene caused the two maidservants beside her to scream, but it was obviously a little too late to help her up now. Chapter 553. Yang Qindong was at least 20 meters away from Madame Snow. He moved his feet and shot out like a bullet. He came to the side of the bicycle and hugged Madame Snow, who was about to touch the ground. Hiss. That's too fast. Looking at the sixth young master, who was standing in front of him a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he was already 20 meters away. Yang Ershuang's eyes were filled with suspicion. He definitely couldn't achieve such speed. However, considering that the young master was a freak, Beta Persei was not the one who called him that. Many guards recognized him as a freak. Yesterday, Yang Qindong finally defeated the 20 guards of the first guard squad by himself. Yang Qindong, who was with the three ladies, seemed to be stronger than before. It was reasonable for him to be so fast in the face of such a freak. Madame Snow thought she would fall to the ground, but now she was in Yang Qindong's warm arms. She could not help blushing. Although they often did some shameful things when there was no one around, and even did it with her sisters, she would still blush in front of outsiders. This was the reservedness of modern women. Honey, can you teach me how to ride a bicycle? Madame Snow asked, trying to suppress her shyness. She did not know why she was so bold. However, she did not consider that the bicycle was newly made. It was probably the first time that Yang Qindong had seen it. Madame Snow did not care about that. In her eyes, Yang Qindong was omnipotent. She believed that he would not let her down. As expected, Yang Qindong nodded. First, he helped Madame Snow to stand up. Then, he reached out to lift up the bicycle. He stepped on the leather seat with his right leg. After feeling it for a while, he exerted force on his foot. Then, the bicycle slowly moved forward under his command. Riding on the bicycle, while feeling the performance of the bicycle, Yang Qindong said aloud, "This is a men's 28 bicycle, the frame is too high and is not suitable for girls to ride. In the future, if you want to ride it, I can arrange for them to make a smaller one for you." Yang Qindong was already very good at riding the bicycle as he spoke. In his previous life, he did not ride the bicycle many times. He did not ride it as much as he did before he became a soldier. However, he had learned how to ride it a long time ago. With the changes in his body, it was a piece of cake. Besides, he could ride planes and tanks easily. This was child's play. Under his manipulation, it didn't take long for him to ride the bicycle with both hands. Compared with other people who would fall down if they gripped the handle too hard, Yang Qindong could ride it so well without holding the handle. This scene instantly made the three ladies admire him. Even the maidservants were trying their best to hold back their screams as their bodies trembled with excitement. The maids who could serve Yang Qindong were happy and unlucky. They were happy because they could often see the sixth young master, the man they admired so many times in their hearts. They were unhappy because they had been with Yang Qindong for a long time. They were always willing to compare other men with him. How could there be any comparison? If they kept going back and forth, other men would naturally not enter their eyes. This would greatly affect their marriage in the future. Of course, these maids had a dream in their hearts, that was, to be favored by Yang Qindong one day, even if they could only be his concubine. Just like in some rich families, the maids, especially the beautiful ones, might fly to the branches and become phoenixes. However, for some reason, Yang Qindong never did that. At least, no maids could have such an honor. But it did not matter. If they could not do it now, they could wait. There should be a chance. After riding the bicycle for a while, Yang Qindong found that all the functions of the bicycle were very good. The running in of all the parts was also very smooth. He could not help but feel satisfied and stopped the bicycle elegantly. Seeing this scene, the women's eyes were full of stars. Their admiration was very clear. "Ha, come on, sit on the back seat and try it." Yang Qindong smiled and pointed to the back seat of the bicycle. Can I? Madame Shui was obviously eager to try, but she still asked shyly. Sister Su, Sister Shui is timid. You can try it. Hu Yan saw Madame Shui's shyness and could not help but smile at Su Monaire, who was sitting beside her. Okay. Su Monaire naturally knew that Hu Yan was provoking Sister Shui, but she still nodded cooperatively. She looked as if she wanted to get up, so did she. Madame Shui could not take it anymore. Without hesitation, she leaned over and sat on the back seat of the bicycle. Ha! Looking at Madame Shui's anxious look, Yang Qindong could not help but laugh. Then he said, "Hold on tight to my waist." Then the bicycle sped up like a gust of wind, reaching a speed of at least 40 kilometers per hour. Madame Shui, who was sitting on the back seat, could only feel the things in front of her flying backward. She was so excited that she hugged Yang Qindong's waist tightly. She looked happy. After Madame Shui, Yang Qindong picked up Hu Yan and Su Monaire. He had no choice. When there were many women, everything required fairness. After riding the bicycle for more than an hour, Yang Qindong was sweating a little. Satisfied, he stopped the bicycle and pointed at Beta Persei, who was drooling not far away, and said, "Come on, try it. Look at you, your clothes are wet with saliva." Ah! When Yang Qindong pointed at him, Beta Persei quickly looked down at his military uniform, but there was nothing there. Then he heard a woman's laughter. Only then did he realize that the young master was teasing him. However, he didn't care so much anymore. He smiled and strode toward the bicycle. Just now, he had seen the sixth young master ride for a long time and thought that he was familiar with the technique. In addition, he was tall and had long legs, so it should not be a problem for him to control it. Yang Qindong returned to Hu Yan and the others. As soon as he sat on the chair, someone fed him all kinds of fruits. He looked very comfortable. Plop! Just as Yang Qindong ate a piece of orange, the sound of something hitting the ground was heard. Needless to say, it was Beta Persei who did not control the bicycle well and fell to the ground. It was not necessary to control the bicycle well with the length of one's legs. In a situation where he did not know how to master balance, and it was his first contact, Beta Persei quickly made a fool of himself and fell to the ground. Because of his tall stature, the fall made a lot of noise. His posture was also very inelegant. One of his left thighs and half of his body were under the bicycle. Ha 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 ha. The madams were stimulated by this scene and laughed. Obviously, they had forgotten the scene where they fell while riding the bicycle. On the other hand, Beta Persei had a persevering spirit. He quickly got up and continued to practice. But from time to time, the handlebars would still shake. However, with the advantage of his long legs, he did not fall down a few times. However, cold sweat came out of his body, which attracted the laughter of the madams. Just like that, the afternoon passed by happily. At dinner time, Ling Song and Gao Xiong each brought their madams to the palace. Calling their madams showed that they were close. This way, they could also quickly get closer to each other. As soon as the two madams arrived, they were pulled to the side by Hu Yan and the others. Naturally, the two teachers sat next to Yang Qindong. When the food and wine were served, the atmosphere at the table quickly became lively. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ling Song and Gao Xiong toasted Yang Qindong a lot of wine. The sixth young master was not invited. With the existence of that qi, as long as he wanted to, he could expel the alcohol at any time. Therefore, sometimes there was no difference between drinking wine and drinking water for him. Wine was often the best lubricant and additive. It could quickly get closer to each other. After a while, the relationship between Yang Qindong, Ling Song, and Gao Xiong became much closer. After 3 rounds of food and 5 rounds of wine, Hu Yan and the other two madams left the table with Ling Song and Gao Xiong's madams. When only the 3 of them were left at the table, Yang Qindong opened his mouth. "How is it? Do you have any opinions about what I did during the day?" "Ah. We don't dare." Ling Song and Gao Xiong quickly waved their hands. "Do you not dare or do you not dare to say it?" Yang Qindong looked at Ling Song and Gao Xiong's eyes and stared closely. Being stared at like this, the two lowered their heads. After today's meeting, the news of the establishment of the political department spread. Mo Qingyu and the others had already chosen a building not far from the military headquarters. In fact, this was something Yang Qindong had planned for a long time. However, when this news came out, many low-level officers came to express their dissatisfaction. In their eyes, this was a sign that the sixth young master did not appreciate them and wanted to deal with them. Regarding the dissatisfaction of the officers, the 2 division commanders did not say anything. However, it was impossible to say that they did not have any opinions. They thought that they had done a good job, but why did the 6th young master want to establish a political department? Did he not like them? Did he want them to move? When people encounter a problem, they would not think about why it happened. Instead, they would think about how to solve the problem and what signal it represented. The 2 of them naturally wondered if the 6th young master really did not trust them anymore. If that was the case, what should they do next? Both of them were division commanders. It was impossible to say that they did not have a group of trustworthy brothers. Although the soul of the Yang army was Yang Qindong, he did not lead the army for a long time. Therefore, many low-level officers ignored the existence of the 6th young master. If they were to make a move at this time, there would be some forces in the army that would be biased towards them. They could then put pressure on Yang Qindong. Chapter 554. Of course, this was just a thought. They wouldn't actually do it. After all, he had only set up the political department. He hadn't done anything to them yet, had he? At this moment, Tiger's man appeared and personally told them that the 6th young master had invited them to dinner. The 2 of them immediately guessed that Yang Qindong wanted to ask them about the political department. If one didn't do anything wrong, they wouldn't be afraid of ghosts calling at their door. They hadn't done anything wrong. They hadn't even said anything unkind. Naturally, they weren't afraid. On the contrary, the 2 of them were still thinking about whether or not they should mention their suggestions and thoughts during dinner. Now that Yang Qindong had finally taken the initiative to say it, it was within their understanding. However, when he suddenly asked if they didn't dare to say it, cold sweat poured out of their foreheads. They could feel that Yang Qindong was very serious. However, before they could think of how to answer, Yang Qindong opened his mouth again. This time, he said with a very serious expression, "The two of you were the first batch of people to follow me. You were also chosen by me. I have to say that you two have some ability. However, I still want to say this. If it wasn't for the young master, what would the two of you be doing? Ling Song, are you still wandering the Jianghu? Dreaming of becoming a hero? Maybe you could save some people, but maybe you wouldn't even have a corpse left. And you, Gao Xiong, are you still a water bandit? Maybe you've grown stronger, or maybe you've been taken over by others. Who knows?" Yang Qindong brought up their past. This was something they didn't want to face. Especially Gao Xiong. He was a water bandit. It wasn't something to be proud of. In the past, when someone brought it up, he would very likely fight with them. However, this matter was brought up by Yang Qindong. He couldn't say anything. After all, what he said was the truth. The two of them stopped talking. Yang Qindong continued, "Now that the two of you are the leaders of a division, I naturally trust you. But do you really have nothing to worry about? I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but if one day, someone uses your past as an excuse to attack you and even wants to deal with you, what will you do? Am I covering up for your little problems? Or do you support those people to take you down?" This. Ling Song and Gao Xiong wanted to explain. But no one was perfect. Who could guarantee that they wouldn't make any mistakes and wouldn't have any problems? If someone really did not want to let it go, that small problem could become a big problem. He thought that if that was really the case, not to mention keeping his position, even keeping his life would be a difficult matter. Due to the environment they had grown up in, it was destined that they were innately incompetent when it came to scheming against each other and fighting for power. This was their shortcoming. If someone really wanted to use such methods against them, they would be powerless to fight back. Their expressions kept changing. Yang Qindong saw all of this. He let out a long sigh. "If I say that the establishment of the political department is a form of protection for you, would you believe me? With the existence of the political department, there will be someone to supervise your authority. While you make fewer mistakes, the political department can also share some of the firepower for you. Isn't this the best of both worlds? Moreover, your authority won't be reduced. It's just that there's an extra procedure when promoting officers. But for those officers who are truly capable and perform well, would there be any problems because of an extra check? On the other hand, it's those problematic officers who want to take advantage of others who will have a headache." After Yang Qindong's analysis, Ling Song and Gao Xiong suddenly felt enlightened. Yes, the establishment of the political department had nothing to do with them. As long as they performed well, there wouldn't be any problems. After all, the political department's minister was the sixth young master himself. Since that was the case, what else did they have to worry about? As the saying goes, if one's heart is clean, one's body is full of righteousness. They didn't rely on other methods to be promoted. In fact, as they became division commanders, the first step of promotion could only be decided by Yang Qindong. Since that was the case, what were they worried about? After thinking it through, Ling Song and Gao Xiong's faces were full of shame. "Sixth young master, we were wrong. Our thinking was too simple." Yang Qindong could tell that the two sincerely admitted their mistakes. He let out a long sigh and said, "Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just don't make them again in the future. Since you know your mistakes, you have to contribute to the establishment of the political department. You have to help when you should. You're all division commanders. You have to show your magnanimity. Do you understand?" "Yes, yes." Ling Song and Gao Xiong kept nodding. These words made them understand Yang Qindong's painstaking efforts. Thinking about it, they had been thinking too much. With the sixth young master's influence and power, if he really didn't like them, would he still need to establish a political department to deal with them? He only needed to say a few words and give a few instructions. The knot in the hearts of the two division commanders was untied. As long as they didn't panic, they would even tell the other junior officers what he said. A truly knowledgeable person would know what to do. With the internal situation stabilized, Yang Qindong could finally rest assured. As for the establishment of the political department, not to mention that some of the officers were already showing signs of arrogance, even if they weren't, it would still be established. If the power wasn't distributed, it would be too centralized. Once there was a problem, it would be a headache to solve. Since that was the case, it was better to nip everything in the bud. With these words, plus the fact that he invited the two division commanders and their wives to the palace for the banquet tonight, there shouldn't be a problem in stabilizing the morale of the army. Once the army was stable, it would naturally be able to display its greatest strength in the war. This was also what Yang Qindong was concerned about. Sure enough, the next morning, after Ling Song and Gao Xiong went to the military headquarters and talked to some of the officers of the regiment, battalion, and even company level, the establishment of the political department was no longer hindered by anyone. On the contrary, there were many people who came to show their goodwill and help. This showed the new situation of the military and government being one family. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. When the new morning arrived, Yang Qindong changed into the marshal's uniform. Under the reluctant gaze of the three wives, of course, the three wives were separated from their husbands on the bed. They couldn't get out of bed after a night of torment. They only wanted to satisfy Yang Qindong. They also wanted a child, so naturally, they were willing to do so. Yang Qindong strode out of the palace. The first Shang dynasty was the first unified dynasty on Ryukyu Island. Its official name was the Shang dynasty. In order to distinguish it from the second Shang dynasty, it was usually called the first Shang dynasty. The first Shang dynasty had a total of 7 generations, from the first Shang-Si king to the last Shangde king. It was only established 63 years before it was destroyed due to internal strife. Yang Qindong's appearance added to this situation. Of course, he didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt towards the destruction of a country other than the foreign races. 3 years ago, when Yang Xie chose this place, it started the battle with the first Shang dynasty. In the beginning, they had a small territory and a small number of people. Now, they had a huge territory. The situation had completely reversed. The child that wasn't valued in the past had now grown into a colossal existence. In the end, it was going to open its bloody mouth and swallow up the last of the New North, reunifying this place. As if they had long sensed that the day of the final battle would come, the first Shang dynasty, whose sea passage had been sealed, began to display their potential to survive. Especially after the land in Taichung was occupied, they accumulated more strength to develop. A person's potential was always limitless. It was as if the greater the pressure, the greater the motivation. In less than 2 years, they had replicated close to 50 Xiangyang cannons. They either installed them on the ships or placed them in front of the docks. It was as if they were going to fight to the death. On land, not only did they replicate some of the lower-grade guns, they also dug countless trenches in the hundreds of acres of land that led to the New North from Taichung. These trenches were intertwined, and because of the terrain, there were high and low trenches. Soldiers armed with guns, bows and arrows, as well as swords and spears, were lying in ambush here. If the mercenaries really barged in and entered this chaotic trench, then the advanced firearms in their hands would be greatly suppressed. They would even have to choose to engage in close combat, and the losses would be immeasurable. There were more than 200 large and small warships waiting at the docks. On the shore, there were better protected cannons that could shoot for a mile as support. In addition, the entrance to Keelung port was originally a little narrow, making it easy to defend but hard to attack. On land, there were intertwined trenches that were like the blood vessels in the human body. It was like a natural moat that prevented the mercenaries from attacking from long range. At this moment, the first Shang dynasty was like a turtle, shrinking its body into a sturdy shell, giving off a feeling that it was impossible to bite and eat. Ever since Yang Qindong left the palace and met up with the army division commander Ling Song, the situation in this area had been continuously reported to him. Actually, this wasn't anything new. When he first came to Qiqian City and understood the situation, he had already received the relevant reports. While he was sighing at the first Shang dynasty's defense, Yang Qindong was also thinking of a military attack strategy. All of this information made one feel that the docks should be easier to attack. After all, the Yang family navy's warships were equipped with long-range and highly destructive cannons. The furthest attack range could reach 20+ kilometers. It was much more advanced than the primitive Xiangyang cannons that could only shoot iron balls. Chapter 555. But the navy was still the navy. If it was a naval battle, with the strength of the Yang family's navy, there was no need to be afraid of anyone. But this time, what they wanted to do was to occupy the dock and land, which was a lot more troublesome. Advanced artillery could allow the navy to take down Keelung port, but in the end, they still had to land. The dock was originally a huge slope, which meant that the soldiers needed to attack it. This was equivalent to putting their bodies in the hands of the enemy. Maybe they could take it down, but they didn't know how much they would have to pay. In comparison, if the army could make a breakthrough, then the navy only needed to provide artillery support, which was much simpler. But what should they do when facing the countless trenches? On this issue, some officers put forward various ideas, especially the newly established staff department in the military. They proposed to flood the trenches. As long as a large amount of seawater was poured into the trenches, the enemy hiding here wouldn't come out and wouldn't retreat. In this way, the initiative of the war would naturally be in their hands. It had to be said that the idea was good, but it was too difficult to implement. First, they had to solve the problem of water. Although there was no shortage of water nearby, how could they draw the seawater into the trenches? It had to be known that the terrain here was high and low. And even if they could borrow the large water pump made by the munitions factory and the power plant to bring the seawater here, did they consider the amount of work? Besides, the enemy wouldn't just wait there and wait for you to flood them. Wouldn't they find a way to drain the water away? In the end, they really didn't know when to stop. Some also said that they could use grenades to open the way and blow up the trenches. This method was not feasible. First, they didn't know where the enemy was. If there were no enemies, wouldn't it be a waste of grenades to blow up the trenches? The number of grenades needed to cover a few hundred acres of land was too large. Second, if you just blew up a trench and thought it was safe, but the enemy moved here in time, wouldn't it be suicide to rush in without any preparation? So whether it was flooding or using grenades to open the way, they were all rejected. In the end, all eyes were on Yang Qindong. It seemed that in their eyes, there was nothing in the world that could make things difficult for the sixth young master. Facing the anticipation of the crowd, Yang Qindong displayed the bearing of a leader. His face was full of confidence, as if he was telling everyone that none of this was a problem. As for how he was going to solve it, he never said. Now that Yang Qindong had finally arrived at the front line and could already see the crisscrossing trenches in the distance, Ling Song and the other army officers once again placed their expectant gazes on Yang Qindong. Today's weather is good, very good. Yang Qindong didn't seem to notice that everyone was looking at him. Instead, he looked up at the sky and seemed to be in a good mood. Among the officers who didn't know why the sixth young master said this, some of the more impatient ones couldn't help but ask for a solution. But Yang Qindong's voice was a step ahead of the others. What's the rush? Didn't we agree that the attack will officially start at 9 o'clock? Just let the soldiers conserve their energy. After being pointed out by Yang Qindong, the officers really didn't know what to say. Some people couldn't help but look at their watches. It was not even 8:20 yet, which meant that they still had 40 minutes to prepare. That was equivalent to going down and watching how the sixth young master would create a miracle. Everyone was waiting. In the entire frontline command post, only the occasional ticking sound of the watch on each officer's wrist came from time to time. The silence lasted for more than 20 minutes until it was 8:50 a.m. Suddenly, there was a commotion among the soldiers of the various regiments and battalions. What's going on? As the commander of the 1st Division of the Army, and also the only division commander of the Army, seeing that the battle was imminent and the 6th young master was by his side, but the soldiers suddenly acted strangely, he was very dissatisfied. He was even more afraid that the 6th young master would blame him, so he immediately looked at the 2nd Regiment commander Luo Pa beside him. Luo Pa naturally understood the meaning behind it and hurriedly walked out of the frontline command post. But before he could ask the soldiers what was going on, he saw everyone's hand gestures. He couldn't help but look up at the sky. The scene that appeared in front of him gave him a big fright. In the originally clear blue sky, there were suddenly 20 large balloons flying in the air. Visible flames could be seen under the balloons as they slowly moved towards the battlefield. This is the Eagle Unit. Luo Pa was also one of the senior officers in the military, so he naturally knew of the existence of the Eagle Unit. He also knew that the training of this unit was very mysterious. Even he didn't know the details. The only thing he knew was that the military would provide a large amount of military pay to them every month. Considering that it was directly approved by the 6th young master, the officers below him didn't have any complaints. But they never thought that this unit would actually be an army, and that there would be 20 of them. When they appeared in the sky, they immediately gave people a feeling of the might of gods. People of that era, even if they were educated, most of them would only know how to read and do accounting. Only a very small number of people would study ancient studies. These people could already be called great scholars, great scholars. But without exception, these scholars wouldn't study the matter of the birth of all things. In their view, it was just an unorthodox method, just a strange technique that couldn't be put on the table. It was under this kind of thinking that made them feel a sense of reverence towards the heaven and earth that they had never studied and understood. It was just like how the legends said that people could fly into the sky and travel through the earth. That was just a legend. It was something that only the mighty and immortals could do. It was impossible for humans to do it. Just as everyone thought so, the Eagle Unit appeared. Not only did they appear, but they also soared in the sky. Although the distance between them and the ground was less than 200 meters, this was already beyond the expectations of humans at that time. Some superstitious soldiers even began to put down the guns in their hands and kneel on the ground to worship. They couldn't be blamed for doing so. Decades of influence made it difficult for them to come into contact with such profound matters. Although those who could become the cold vanguard had a certain degree of cultural foundation, for most soldiers, it was limited to reading and reading maps. Sorry, they didn't have the time to learn anything more profound, and they couldn't learn it. Luo Pa's knowledge was naturally different from ordinary soldiers. But even so, he was still shocked by the sudden appearance of the Eagle Unit in the sky, so much so that he forgot to report what he saw to his division commander. Only when the 3rd Regiment's commander Wusheng also walked out from the command center and stood beside him, similarly revealing an expression of disbelief as he looked at the sky, did Luo Pa finally come back to his senses. Then, he pulled this former subordinate of his and strode back to the command center. Since the two commanders had both returned, Ling Song looked over with an inquiring look. Wusheng was still in shock and naturally couldn't answer. Luo Pa's excitement and agitation had calmed down a lot. He could now use words to explain the reason. Reporting to division commander, the Eagle Unit has appeared above our heads. They are hanging high in the sky, no different from gods. What? Upon hearing this answer, Ling Song's first thought was to ask if there was something wrong with his head. But considering that the 6th young master was right beside him, Luo Pa shouldn't have said something like this without thinking. In the end, he didn't question him. Instead, he strode out of the command center and said, "I'll go take a look." The truth was the truth. It wouldn't disappear just because someone saw it. When Leng Song and the other officers returned to the command center, everyone looked at Yang Qindong with a lot more respect. They knew that the sudden appearance of this godlike air force was definitely the work of the sixth young master. In this world, he was probably the only one who could do this. As expected, Yang Qindong waited for everyone's attention to fall on him before finally speaking. That's right, they are the Eagle unit. I call them the prototype of the Air Force. What do you think? Now that you have their cooperation, you only need to follow their commands in the air to know how many enemies are hiding in which trenches. At that time, you can freely choose whether to use grenades to blow them up or directly charge in to kill them. The more Yang Qindong spoke of it casually, the more the officers below were in awe of him. This was their sixth young master, the god of war in their army, the god in the hearts of the people. He was the only one who could always think of the simplest and most effective solution when faced with any problem. After that, it was time for the regimental and battalion officers to walk out of the command center. Yang Qindong also said that there were a total of 18 hot air balloons in the sky. This time, the main forces participating in the battle were 3 cold vanguard regiments and 3 auxiliary regiments. Each regiment had 3 battalions, which was a total of 18 battalions. In other words, each battalion could follow a hot air balloon and destroy the chaotic trenches of the 1st Qing Consortium under their command. Seeing that it was about 5 minutes to 9 a.m., all the regimental and battalion officers went down to the front lines to command the battle. When the news spread, all the soldiers knew that the hot air balloon above their heads was actually their ally, their comrade. Their morale skyrocketed, and the faces of the soldiers turned red as if they had been injected with some kind of hormone. In comparison, the 1st Qing Consortium soldiers who were hiding in the trenches like ostriches were dumbfounded. Chapter 556. The hot air balloons that suddenly appeared in the sky were quickly discovered by them. More and more soldiers knelt on the ground to worship them. It was rare for them to learn any culture, and this was the first time they saw the hot air balloons in action. It would be strange if they weren't afraid and nervous. After kneeling and praying, they heard the cheers coming from the army opposite them. They also saw the soldiers in the same mercenary uniform pointing at them from the hot air balloons in the sky. As long as one wasn't a fool, one would understand what was going on. This is actually an army sent by the mercenaries. Could it be that they have received the approval of the heavens and are here to destroy us? Even the heavens want to take care of them. How are we going to fight this battle? No matter where we hide, they will be able to see us clearly. Won't we still become their targets? The discussions of the soldiers grew louder and louder. It had already caused a huge impact, and the morale of the soldiers had also fallen to the lowest point. The generals of the 1st Qing dynasty also felt that it was inconceivable. They were also concerned about the morale of the soldiers. At that moment, they wanted to suppress the fear in their hearts. Someone suggested to use firearms to shoot down all the hot air balloons. As long as they succeeded, all the fear from before would disappear with the wind. However, even though their vision was clear, with the distance between the firearms and arrows, it was impossible for them to hit the hot air balloons in the sky. How could a firearm that only had an effective shooting range of 100 meters hit a hot air balloon that was 150 meters away? Not to mention that they were shooting towards the sky. This would shorten their shooting range even further. A series of gunshots rang out, and arrows flew through the air. However, in the end, there was no response at all. There was no response at all. The 1st Qing dynasty took the lead and fired the first shot. Following that, it was time for the mercenaries to retaliate. Under the command of the hot air balloons, the locations of the enemies and the number of enemies were all exposed clearly. If there were more enemies in a trench, they should throw grenades. If there were only 2 or 3 enemies in a trench, they could directly rush in and fight with bayonets. If there were trenches that were just for show, but in fact, there were no enemies and they could be directly occupied, etc. The mercenaries were like tigers that had grown wings as they advanced step by step in an orderly manner. From time to time, there would be the sound of grenades and gunshots. Originally, he thought that with the protection of these trenches, even if he couldn't defeat the mercenaries, he could at least fight them to a standstill. But because of the sudden addition of the hot air balloons, everything they had prepared seemed so laughable. In just 3 hours, over 100 trenches were occupied and close to 10,000 Shang clan soldiers were killed or captured. This godlike speed of attack had completely messed up the Shang army's deployment. As they retreated again and again, the morale of the army was shaken. Some of the soldiers who didn't want to die began to retreat. They became deserters, throwing down their weapons and fleeing to the rear. Some even hung up white flags in the trenches and surrendered as captives. This was like a spreading plague, and the morale of the Shang clan army was slowly crumbling. Then, like a dam bursting, the morale of the Shang clan army became like a vast ocean. The defense of the trenches, which had been prepared for years, was broken in just 6 hours. Even Yang Qindong, who had been prepared for this, was surprised by this speed. Of course, Yang Qindong had neglected the reverence and fear people had for the heavens and earth. Actually, from the moment the hot air balloons appeared, the morale of the Shang clan army was already broken. It was only a matter of time before they lost. To be able to lose so quickly, it was mostly because they felt that the mercenaries were blessed by the heavens and earth. Then, wouldn't it be disrespectful to the heavens and earth to fight against them? The speed of the army's attack was so fast that it was beyond the imagination of both parties. Outside the Keelung port, the Navy also launched their attack at 9 a.m. The difference between the Navy and the Army was that under the command of Division Commander Gao Xiong, the Navy launched a merciless artillery attack. They didn't seem to have any intention of entering the port. When they were still 3 kilometers away, the cannons rained down on them as though they didn't cost anything. This greatly disappointed the Shang clan's soldiers who were prepared to clash with the enemy. Among these 200-plus ships, there were some that were not bad. They weren't small and were worth quite a lot. To them, this was a bait. Whoever saw such a good ship wouldn't want to let it go easily and would want to use it for themselves. If they had such thoughts, they would have to engage in close combat. If that was the case, the Xiangyang cannons could be used to attack from a distance of 1 li away. Perhaps, they might even be able to fight to a stalemate. But who would have thought that the enemy didn't have the slightest intention of taking advantage of them? Cannonballs fell like rain, smashing into the harbor and sinking countless ships. They also smashed into the harbor, sending the Xiangyang cannons standing there flying into the air. Don't be nervous, don't be afraid. They will eventually come ashore. When that time comes, it will be time for us to retaliate. The Shang clan generals who were guarding the port still held on to a trace of hope. He believed that the mercenaries weren't here to destroy the ships but to occupy the port. Since they wanted to occupy the port, they had to launch a wave attack. As long as the army could make use of the crisscrossing trenches to block the mercenaries, they would have a chance to turn the tables. Unfortunately, this Shang clan general was destined to be disappointed. Because the army that he had high hopes for had actually failed before them. Not only did 30,000 of the 50,000 soldiers surrender, thousands of them died in battle. The remaining 10,000 plus soldiers had already been lost in Sinzu, Ilan and other places and retreated back to the New North Prefecture. It seemed that only by returning to the high city with walls around them, they would be safer. By the time the news of the army's defeat reached the port, it was already noon of the second day. When the general who was guarding the port heard the news of the army's defeat despite the risk of being killed by the artillery shells, he let out a long sigh and led the soldiers who were hidden in various places to retreat back to New North City. At this point, in just 2 days, the Shang clan's external defenses had failed and they had all retreated back to the New North Prefecture. Because of this, their military strength had reached 80,000 men. By the time the army of mercenaries arrived at the New North Prefecture, they saw the tightly shut city gates of the 6 cities. Quickly surround this place. At the same time, clear out any hidden threats and enemies. Kill those who don't surrender. Leng Song, the commander of the 1st Division of the Leng Vanguard Army, gave the order and thousands of soldiers started to get busy. On the 4th day of the war, Geelong port changed hands. After clearing out all the obstacles, the Navy's ships finally entered and aimed their cannons at the New North Prefecture. The range of the cannons here was enough to reach the New North Prefecture. On the 5th day of the war, Yang Qindong leisurely arrived at the New North Prefecture. Since there were 6 city gates here, it could be seen that this was a big city. He didn't want such a big city to be destroyed by artillery shells. Yang Qindong pointed forward and said majestically, "Department Head Yang, the rest is up to you." Department Head Yang Qindong, Yang Shan, was originally the assistant minister of the Ming dynasty's Ministry of Rights. During the Tumu Castle incident, he was saved by Yang Qindong and followed Zhu Qizhen to Nanjing. After the southern Ming dynasty was established in Yingtian Prefecture, he was appointed as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. However, because he offended Minister Lu De, he had no choice but to go to Baiming and was saved by Yang Qindong. After being sent to Qiqian City, he was appointed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs with his own abilities. Yang Shan was good at arguing. Sending him to the first Shang clan to persuade them to surrender was the most appropriate choice. Ever since he came to Qiqian City, Yang Shan's horizons were broadened. Later on, because he was old friends with Yu Qian, he was recommended to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Yang Shan, who was ambitious and wanted to do great things, didn't have much of an idea after taking up the position. Qiqian City didn't even have a country, how could there be diplomacy? Although there were many countries that he dealt with on the sea, those people didn't even have the qualifications to come to the island. His position as a department head was just a facade. After waiting until now, he finally had a chance to perform properly. Furthermore, it was right under the nose of Yang Qindong. He knew that this 6th young master had a high status in Qiqian City. How could he not want to perform well? Yang Shan, who was called out, didn't even think twice. He didn't even consider whether his life would be in danger after entering the New North Prefecture. He straightened his clothes and strode towards the city gate with the 2 guards in charge of protecting him. Yang Shan revealed his identity when he reached the city gates. After waiting for about an incense's time, he entered the city on a basket placed down from the city gate tower. "Young master, can he do it?" Seeing Yang Shan and his 2 bodyguards enter the city, Tiger's Mane asked worriedly. "Whether it works or not, we still have to try." Yang Qindong chuckled, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want to destroy the New North Prefecture of the 6 gates and the fact that most of the people in the city were descendants of the Han people, he wouldn't have to waste so much effort and could just attack the city directly. However, it would be best if they could achieve victory without the use of swords and spears. As for whether King Shangde would harm Yang Qindong still had some confidence. Unless their entire country was annihilated, it would be extremely daring of them to kill an envoy in such a situation. If they really had such guts, they wouldn't have stayed in the mercenary army's blockade for 3 years. They would have risked their lives to break out of the encirclement. Moreover, ever since Yang Shan entered the city, he had been walking with his head held high. Even though he was under the protection of the Shang clan's soldiers, he didn't even frown. He had displayed the prestige of an envoy and didn't tarnish the reputation of the mercenaries. Chapter 557. Of course, it was because of his performance that the soldiers were even more fearful of him. When they thought about how the New North City was already surrounded, they didn't dare to underestimate this powerful military envoy. The first Shang dynasty had only been established for about 40 years and the palace still looked very majestic. Of course, for Yang Shan, who had served as an official of the great Ming dynasty, he was still a little petty. Therefore, along the way, he looked straight ahead, and his footsteps were steady, giving people a sense of confidence. Yang Shan was not the only one. Even the 2 Ling Feng beside him had sharp eyes. They were not affected by the environment at all and showed no signs of fear. In fact, these two men were also people who had been through a bloody battle. This time, they came with the mentality of win or die trying. They had already tied quite a number of explosives on their bodies. If things didn't go well, they would be able to detonate them with a pull. It was because of the strength of the three that the soldiers of the first Shang dynasty couldn't even search them. Using Yang Shan's words, what they did was an insult to the mercenaries. That was a heinous crime. Then, there was no need to talk and they should just fight. Compared to the upper echelons of the first Shang dynasty, the soldiers only wanted to live. In their eyes, even if they won the war and survived, it didn't mean that they were living a better life than others. After all, in this era, soldiers belonged to the lower class and were rarely looked up to. With such thoughts, they naturally hoped that they could resolve the crisis in front of them through negotiation. Not to mention, many of them had heard through various channels that the commoners who had joined the mercenaries were living a much better life than them. Each of them had their own fields or jobs, so their lives were worry-free and they could even save a lot of money. That was the life that they wanted to live. They successfully arrived at the main hall of the palace. At this moment, all the officials of the first Shang dynasty were gathered here. Even the king, Shangde, was sitting high up. When Shangde succeeded the throne, he was only 9 years old. Now, he was only 13 years old. Moreover, he had been besieged since 3 years ago. His territory had gradually shrunk, causing him to live in anxiety and apprehension every day. Looking from afar, although he was sitting high on the dragon throne, his face was pale and his condition was not good. Crimson City's foreign minister, Yang Shan, greets your majesty the king. When they were still a dozen or so meters away from the dragon throne, Yang Shan stood still and spoke. However, he didn't bend his body in any way to express his transcendent status. Yang Shan didn't bow. Many officials of the first Shang dynasty saw this but they didn't express anything. Compared to such unnecessary etiquette, they valued their own rights more. What would happen if the battle continued? What would happen if he surrendered? When it came to patriotism, perhaps it was more of a matter for ordinary people. As people who benefited from it, of course, they would do whatever they could. Anyway, they wouldn't be able to become the king, so who would they keep their chastity for? All the officials didn't speak. Although the young king, Shangde, was unhappy, he didn't say anything about this matter. In comparison, he was also concerned about his own safety. After all, he was still a young man and he didn't want to die. Department head Yang, may I know what you have for me this time? Shangde personally went up to speak. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that the first Shang dynasty was already in a mess. Otherwise, there were some things that didn't require the king to personally go up to the front lines. Once he said something wrong, wouldn't there be no way to turn things around? Yang Shan saw everything. After being an official for dozens of years, although his other abilities weren't outstanding, in terms of observation, he was much better than the officials from the Ministry of Rights. When he saw that it was the king of a country who went up to the front lines, he had a plan in his heart. When he spoke again, he was full of confidence. Your Majesty the King, this time, I am here to rescue all of you. Right now, the mercenary army is extremely powerful and the soldiers are all elite. Their morale is high and their weapons are advanced. They have already surrounded the New North Prefecture. If it wasn't for the fact that we are all from the same country, the cannons would have been fired and the city gates would have been blasted open. I am here to give all of you a chance to live. As long as all of you surrender and open the city gates, your safety will naturally be guaranteed. The king will have to abdicate, but other than losing his authority, he can still live a comfortable life. As for the rest of the officials, it will depend on each of your abilities. Of course, your lives will definitely not be in danger. Even your personal wealth will be protected to a certain extent. After Yang Qindong listed out all of his requests, a smart official immediately asked, a certain extent of protection, is there a proportion? Yes, at least half. Yang Shan replied without hesitation. Half, only half. After the officials received this answer, they immediately began to discuss. That's right, half is a little too little. We have lost too much. Needless to say, the people who made this kind of noise must be the misers group. They belonged to the type that cared more about money than their lives. The discussion below entered Yang Shan's ears, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. He first listened quietly. When these people were almost done talking, he coughed lightly and continued, "You haven't contacted the outside world for so long. I'm afraid you all still don't know what has happened, right? Speaking of which, ever since Yang Xia occupied Qiqian City, he had completely sealed off the entire Ryukyu Island from the outside world. In total, it had been more than 3 years. These officials had indeed not received any news from the outside world for a long time. When Yang Shan said this, their interest was immediately piqued. Seeing that no one spoke, Yang Shan's eyes flashed with pride. He continued, "In the past 3 years, the powerful Great Ming dynasty has been divided into 3 factions. They are Bai Ming, Southern Ming, and Min King's faction. They are no longer as strong as before. On the contrary, the mercenary army's influence has been expanded and strengthened. Not long ago, the mercenary army sent troops to Jiaoji and destroyed the Jiaoji kingdom in a month. Of course, we have also negotiated with them before and promised them the same benefits as you all. It's a pity that some people didn't take advantage of it. As for the outcome." At this point, Yang Shan intentionally paused. This made the officials of the first Shang dynasty who were listening attentively anxious. Someone couldn't help but ask, what happened? Could it be that they were all killed? Amazing. This mister's guess is extremely correct. When the negotiations failed, the mercenary army charged into the capital of Jiaoji. They killed their way into the big cities of Jiaoji. Those officials who didn't choose to surrender were all exterminated. Even the king of Jiaoji, Li Li, and the crown prince, Li Yuanlong, were faced with a situation where only one of them could survive. Later on, in front of many people, Li Li personally killed his only son, Li Yuanlong, in order to survive. Now, he is living out his remaining years in Qiqian City. Although he lost his authority, his life was saved. It's a pretty good ending. What? Hearing Yang Shan say that Jiaoji was destroyed, all the officials were killed, and even the king of Li Li had no choice but to kill his only son in order to survive. All the officials of the Shang dynasty who were present couldn't help but be shocked. The strength of Little Ryukyu Island was limited. It had faced various dangers in different eras. However, no matter what the outcome was, whether they were defeated or forced to surrender, as the officials of the country, they had no problem keeping their lives. After all, no matter who occupied this place, someone had to take care of it. As the natives of this place, no one knew the situation better than them, right? However, who would have thought that the mercenary army would really kill when they attacked? Even the king of Li Li, who was known to be vicious and merciless, didn't let him off. Didn't that mean that if they didn't surrender, only death would await them? The officials felt a chill in their hearts. Some of the smarter ones were already considering if they should choose to surrender. After all, they had already experienced the firepower of the mercenary army. Didn't they see how their impregnable defense was flattened in less than 2 days? They wouldn't be able to gain any advantage if they really fought with such an opponent. As the officials were calculating in their hearts, the young King Shangde was also calculating in his heart. He had to admit that when he heard that Li Li was willing to kill his only son in order to survive, he was really afraid. As the king of a country, Shangde had never truly enjoyed a day of happiness and high status since he took office. He was young to begin with, and his father had passed away in a hurry. He was the type of person who was appointed in the face of danger. This meant that everything had already begun before he was prepared. Even though he was still young, he had no choice but to think of ways to deal with internal affairs. However, before he could do anything, the mercenary army appeared. After that, they swept through the entire Shang dynasty in a domineering manner. The Shang dynasty was suppressed to a certain extent and lost its vitality. He had been in power for nearly 4 years, but he had actually spent all his time thinking about how to break through the blockade and kill his way out. However, this mission had never been accomplished. Now that someone had finally arrived at his doorstep, his choice had become inevitable. Speaking of which, Shangde didn't have much of a choice. He, who hadn't enjoyed much on the throne, had thought more than once that it would be great if he could be an ordinary person and live an ordinary life. Now, the opportunity had appeared. As long as he nodded and opened the city gates of New North Prefecture, he would be able to step down from the throne and live an ordinary life. Chapter 558. In other words, he could bear the worst result. Therefore, he did not have any resistance to surrendering. However, he still could not stand Yang Shan's aggressiveness. Even if Yang Shan wanted them to surrender, shouldn't he at least have a good talk? Why did he have to be so aggressive right from the start? With a hint of anger, Shangde asked Yang Shan in a voice that was still young and hadn't reached puberty, "Emissary, what if we don't surrender? Have you thought about it? No matter if we live or die in the future, you, who appeared here, will definitely be the first to die. Aren't you afraid of death?" The young Shangde actually threatened Yang Shan. When the officials heard this, many of them panicked. They didn't want to die. If they really killed Yang Shan, it would be tantamount to forcing the mercenaries to become mortal enemies with them. If that was the case, no one present would have a good life. The officials were all panicking. They almost shouted out to stop their king Shangde. In reality, this kind of thing had been done many times in the past 4 years. For their own benefit, these officials had always been able to band together and force the young king Shangde to give in. This time, they were prepared to repeat the same story. But before these officials could speak, Yang Shan had already started laughing loudly. After a round of laughter, he suddenly pointed at the high and mighty King Shangde and said, "Of course, everyone is afraid of death. But if my death can cause so many to die with me, it will be worth it." Swoosh! Just as Yang Shan finished speaking, the 2 followers of Ling Feng behind him had already pulled off the buttons on their outer robes, revealing the densely packed detonators wrapped around their waists. What is that? The sudden change in the situation caused everyone to exclaim in surprise. Some of the more knowledgeable officials couldn't help but exclaim, "That looks like something made of gunpowder." "You are indeed knowledgeable." Yang Shan nodded his head towards the minister who spoke with a look of admiration. Then, he looked at the other ministers and introduced the item as if he was a salesman promoting his goods. "This item is called a detonator. It's a new explosive that our mercenary army has developed." After saying this, he raised his head to look at the palace. Then, he nodded and muttered to himself, "If everything is normal, these detonators should be able to completely collapse this palace." Ah! Hearing that these lightning tubes were actually so powerful, all of the officials' faces changed. Although some of them didn't think that the power of this thing was as strong as Yang Shan said, they didn't dare to gamble. They were all standing here. If it really was as Yang Shan said, wouldn't it mean that their lives would be in danger? Your Majesty, we can't defeat the mercenaries. Let's just surrender." "That's right, Your Majesty." A real man knows when to stretch and when to shrink. Let's lower our heads for now, and in the future. When the courtier reached this point, he couldn't even continue his lie. If the kingdom was destroyed, the king would be placed under house arrest. What future would there be? Many officials started to plead for leniency. Without exception, they all expressed the same attitude, which was that they absolutely could not become enemies with the mercenaries, and even more so, they could not harm Yang Shan. Some of the ministers who held military power had already thought it through. If the king insisted on doing things his way, they could only use their power to restrain him first. The high and mighty Shangde couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the reactions of the courtiers below. Although all of this was within his expectations, just like in the past 4 years, whenever there was a threat to their interests, these people would advise him with the big picture in mind. They were eating the salary of the kingdom and enjoying the benefits and power that came with being in a high position. However, when the king was in danger, none of them thought for the kingdom. Instead, they were still plotting their own schemes. Shangde was completely disappointed in them. Among these courtiers, there wasn't even one who was as fearless as Yang Shan. What future did a kingdom like this have? Even if there weren't any mercenaries, the kingdom wouldn't last long. Since that was the case, forget it. If they wanted to surrender, so be it. After all, he didn't want to be the king anymore. Under the pleading of the courtiers, Shangde finally made the decision to surrender. Then, they put down their weapons and opened the city gates. The mercenaries entered the city and took over. All the courtiers, including Shangde himself, were waiting in their own residences, waiting for their fate to judge them. Yang Shan completed his mission of persuasion and walked out of the New North mansion in high spirits. Countless mercenaries and auxiliary soldiers entered the mansion in exchange for him. Not bad, well done. Yang Qindong patted Yang Shan's shoulder with a satisfied expression. Next, you will be in charge of taking over the courtiers here. Those who have committed heinous crimes must not be let off. As for those courtiers and merchants who still have a conscience, just confiscate half of their assets. Yes, your majesty knows what to do. Yang Shan nodded his head respectfully. If one wanted to be looked up to and respected by others, then one needed to display one's capabilities. This was a good opportunity to do so. After handing over the task to Yang Qindong, he walked towards the New North Prefecture under the protection and escort of the first and second guards. In his previous life, he had been here before. But at this moment, there weren't any tall buildings like in his previous life. Even the most prosperous streets of the New North Prefecture still gave off a filthy feeling. As he walked, he finally arrived at the palace and saw the last king of the Shang dynasty, Shangde. King Shangde, who had been waiting here for a long time, knelt on the ground when he saw Yang Qindong and the rest, looking very obedient. Yang Qindong's gaze landed on the 13-year-old Shangde and he sighed softly. Perhaps in the eyes of others, it was because of him that Shangde didn't have the chance to display his talents. But who knew that it was because of him that Shangde's fate changed? At least it wouldn't be like his previous life, where the first Shang dynasty fell apart due to the chaos in the court and Shangde was killed by his courtiers. Because of Yang Qindong, as long as Shangde was obedient, he should be able to have a good ending. The Prince of Sin, Shangde, greets the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Shangde knelt on the ground and shouted. Obviously, someone had already told him about Yang Qindong's identity. Get up, Yang Qindong said as he extended his hand to help Shangde up. It could be seen that Yang Qindong was still very courteous to the Shang dynasty. At least, the courtiers who surrendered would not have the honor of having Yang Qindong personally help them up. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Shangde may be young, but he had learned this set of etiquette since young and was naturally very familiar with it. Shangde stood up, and Yang Qindong patted him on the shoulder. Don't think too much about it. The burden that history has placed on you is too heavy. You've also worked hard. Although the results may not be satisfactory, it's not your fault. Next, I will arrange for someone to send you to Qiqian City. Your courtyard has already been built, you can live there in the future. For some reason, after hearing Yang Qindong's words, Shangde's eyes were filled with tears. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this Duke of Loyalty and Courage understood him well. Shangde knew how heavy his burden was. In the past 4 years, he had not had a good night's sleep. Now that everything had been settled, he could finally have a good night's sleep. Thinking about it, that feeling should be very good. Following the takeover of the New North Prefecture, it represented the destruction of the first Shang dynasty. After the news reached Qiqian City, Lord Yuqian, who had already prepared his men, waved his hand and 30,000 educated youths from Qiqian City entered Ilan, Taoyuan, New North, Keelung and other places under the protection of 30,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Presumably, it would not be long before these places were completely transformed. A new city that was different from this era would quickly rise from the ground. In a small town outside of Luang Prabang City, one of the territories of the Lansang Kingdom. For the past few days, the atmosphere here was extremely tense. Those who appeared in this area had to go through strict checks before they were allowed to enter and leave. This had disrupted the lives of the people here. However, because this area was under the control of the military, the news could not be spread out. And in this unknown small town, no one knew that the Lansang Kingdom's king, Payasai, was meeting with the Jiaoxi's general, Fan Yuhai. Back then, Fan Yuhai had defended Shiyu City and fought a decisive battle with the mercenaries. After his defeat, he did not enter the city immediately. Instead, he led 20,000 elite soldiers and fled the city, becoming the strongest military force of the Jiaoxi kingdom. As a general of Jiaoxi that had been destroyed, Fan Yuhai still had some capabilities. In the past month, he had actually gathered 60,000 deserters from Jiaoxi. Together with his 20,000 elite soldiers, he had a total of 80,000 men. With such strength, he finally had the qualifications to meet with the Lansang Kingdom's king and discuss the matter of cooperation. In the largest inn in the town, the two sides met. Fan Yuhai first explained the current situation to him. Your Majesty, everyone knows that the mercenaries are as scheming as Sima Zhao. Destroying Jiaoxi is just their first step. They will not be satisfied. Furthermore, you had previously sent reinforcements to Jiaoxi. At that time, you had already formed a grudge. I believe that not long after, once they have completely destroyed Jiaoxi, they will raise their butcher's knife and come for you. However, I wonder if your Majesty has any countermeasures at that time? The moment both parties sat down, Fan Yuhai exaggerated the threat of the mercenaries to force the other party to make a decision and declare war on the mercenaries. Since Payasai was able to become the king, he was naturally not scared. He looked at Fan Yuhai with an unhappy expression. Don't be alarmist. Just tell me what your plan is and how confident you are. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.